Hey there YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. You might be wondering why this episode seems so spooky. Well, I made it during October, and if you had been a channel member or a patron, you could have seen it in that month. Oh well. Anyway, I figured that for this month I should take a look at the creepiest creationist there is. Carl Baugh is basically what happens when an eldritch abomination from beyond the stars inhabits the husk of a human body, but never really figures out how humans act or speak. We're taking a look at his show Creation in Symphony, which was apparently published on VHS in 1996. At least that's what IMDb seems to think. Anyway, here's Creation in Symphony.
150 years ago, the theory of evolution found reception in the mind of Western man.
You see what I mean? You can tell Carl wrote this because no normal human would say, "found reception in the mind of Western man." There's no reason for the passive voice there, the use of reception is non-standard, and it's just all around awkward.
It was not a new idea. It had been introduced in religious political documents in ancient Babylon.
I would really like to see a citation for an ancient Babylonian religious political document that bears any resemblance to the theory of evolution by natural selection proposed by Darwin, or even better, modern evolutionary theory.
And later in secular contemplations of developing Greece.
Hey, fun fact, the secular-sacred distinction didn't really exist until power struggles between the hereditary nobility and the church in Christian-dominated countries.
Erasmus Darwin came up with the idea of natural selection as a mechanism for evolution. His grandson Charles introduced the concept to the secular academic community, which was eager to embrace a non-theistic doctrine.
Yeah, that's why leading scientists at the time, like Charles Lyell and Richard Owen, were lifelong Christian believers who rejected the idea, although Lyell softened to it eventually, and who accepted special creation and the flood of Noah.
This doctrine removed the need for a creator in the natural world and the need for accountability in the spiritual world.
Weird how the majority of Christians seem to accept the theory of evolution while still seeing a creator and the need for their salvation as, still a thing. It's almost like Baugh is just making shit up.
The text of this video series shows that evolution does not work in theory or in laboratory research. The evidence is heavily in favor of special creation.
Yeah. Is it though?
In this series of lectures, a complete creation model has been developed with extensive technical references.
I feel like they just don't plan to give us these references, or if they do, that they won't actually support special creation.
Prepare to have your mind dramatically expanded and your faith academically justified as our speaker, Dr. Carl Baugh, takes you on a fascinating journey from the microscopic to the galactic. Discover Creation in Symphony.
Hello, I'm Carl Baugh, Director of Creation Evidences Museum in Glen Rose and Director of International Expeditions looking for living dinosaurs.
The weird thing is that now, nearly 30 years since this video was made, and despite how easy it is to find living dinosaurs who live on every continent, yes, even Antarctica, and virtually every island, he hasn't found a one. Maybe he shouldn't lead with that.
Welcome to the discussion today. We're going to discuss very intimate questions which have to do with your past, your present, and your future.
Carl Baugh asking me intimate questions sounds like the most awkward horror show imaginable.
And that of all of mankind. We're going to talk about dinosaurs, Tyrannosaurus rex, Pachycephalosaurus, Acrocanthosaurus.
Pro tip to the editor and or cameraman, you might want to pan or truck the camera to the animals he's mentioning, since his gestures imply that there are models of them around the set.
Are there any dinosaurs still alive today?
Yeah, there are penguins, eagles, ostriches, flamingos, cormorants, robins, parrots, etc.
Recently, our team arrived from an international expedition in the jungles of Papua New Guinea. We have over a dozen eyewitness accounts of creatures that for the world sound like in the description of those personal eyewitness accountants.
That's not what the word accountant means.
Including pastors, educators, school teachers, heads of clans, chieftains.
Ah yes, all people with impeccable skills of observation and extensive training in comparative anatomy and taxonomy.
These creatures, according to those descriptions, for the world sound like rhamphorhynchoid pterodactyls.
So Carl's evidence of living dinosaurs is that some chieftains and missionaries say they saw things that aren't dinosaurs. And of course, his expedition didn't turn up any physical evidence, so even the reported non-dinosaurs almost certainly don't exist.
With leather-like wings, reptiles, with a beak, a crest, hands on their wings, webbed feet. These creatures glow in the dark from their undersection.
Which would make them the only known bioluminescent tetrapods, if they existed.
Often the tail glows in the dark. For you scholars in the audience, you'll recognize that a pterodactyl that has a tail would be a rhamphorhynchoid pterodactyl.
Wrong. Here's a pterodactyloid pterosaur Pteranodon longiceps. You might notice that it has a tail supporting the posterior-most wing membrane. Rhamphorhynchoid pterosaurs are known for their long tails, but later pterosaurs were not tailless.
Now, according to the theory of evolution, which in the past I have believed and taught, but do no longer believe nor teach.
Bullshit. Carl evinces no evidence that he understands even the most basic aspects of evolution, and so couldn't possibly have taught in any legitimate way.
According to the theory of evolution, rhamphorhynchoid pterodactyls saw their demise 225 million years ago.
That's the early Norian stage of the Triassic. The prototypical rhamphorhynchoid, Rhamphorhynchus, is from the Tithonian and Kimmeridgian stages of the Jurassic, the final two stages of the Jurassic, some 157.3 to 145 million years ago. So, about 100 million years later than Paw is allowing for. And it's not evolution that says that, it's stratigraphy and radiometric dating that say that, both of which are independent of evolution. The fact that they tend to line up with evolutionary biology is just more evidence that evolutionary biology provides a useful and likely accurate model of the past history of life on Earth.
Are they still around? Well, let's explore the issue.
I love this because 1, he knows his expedition turned up absolutely nothing, and 2, even if there were some ghost lineage of rhamphorhynchoid pterosaurs that had survived to the 1990s, that wouldn't mean anything for evolution. Ghost lineages are a thing, since the fossil record is far from complete.
I'm glad you're here.
That had all the welcoming charm of a vampire welcoming you to his castle.
By the way, how did you get here?
I've had multiple requests to cover Carl, and I figured that given how absurdly inhuman and creepy he is, that October would be a good time to do it. So when I went looking towards the end of September for the creepiest and stupidest content I could find to respond to, Carl popped up really fast as a good idea. And that's how I got to be here, responding to a man who acts exactly how you might expect someone named Hugh Mann of Humansville, Missouri to act.
Well, I don't mean your mode of transportation, the vehicle in which you arrived. I mean, how did you get here?
YouTube.
You as a person, living, breathing, thinking.
Carl knows what sex is, right? Like, he can't be so divorced from humanity that he doesn't know what sex is.
Reasoning, feeling, deciding, sensing all that's about you. How did you get here?
It's still sex. My parents had sex. I was conceived. My egg was laid. I hatched.
That question is central to what makes us tick and all our future.
I for one don't think that my future is primarily determined by what my parents got up to the day I was conceived. In fact, I don't really think about it much. It's kind of weird that apparently Carl thinks about his parents doing the nasty and the pasty all the time.
It's central to our reasoning processes. The great philosophers of the centuries have asked that question along with 3 others. Every grandmother in this audience, every child, every granddad, every parent, every individual that has walked down...
Shelbyville? I needed a new heel for my shoe. So, I decided to go to Morganville, which is what they call Shelbyville in those days. So I tied an onion to my belt, which was the style.
These are the great questions of life. Number 1, who am I?
I'm the dapper dinosaur. I said that already.
Number 2, how did I get here? That's the question I asked a moment ago. What brought me here?
searching YouTube for the stupidest thing a creepy old guy who seems as human as Edgar from Men in Black right before he sheds his human suit has ever produced.
What are the life processes?
What are the life processes? What a weird and vague question. I don't know. Metabolism? Intake of nutrients? Waste removal and reproduction? There, I'll go with that.
Did I arrive by naturalistic circumstances with a fortunate combination of time, chance, and inanimate matter?
I mean, those things were definitely involved, although without perfect knowledge, I can't really say for certain that that's all that was involved. And if you want to think that there was more involved without denying science, then go for it. I'm not here to advocate for or against such beliefs.
Did the universe produce me in an evolutionary, naturalistic means?
Me, personally? No, because evolution is a thing that happens to populations, not individuals. Was my species, Ceratosaurus nasicornis, so produced? Yes.
Or was I supernaturally created in the original proto-form?
Nope, I'm pretty sure my embryonic development wasn't a miracle. Neither was Carl's, I'm willing to bet. I'm sure when he was decanted from his maturation tube, the inhuman cloners didn't use any magic in creating him, just inscrutable alien motivation.
Number 3, what am I doing here?
Eking out a living by responding to pseudoscientific conspiracy theories like young Earth creationism, New Age, ancient high-tech nonsense, etc.
What's my purpose here?
Same question, same answer.
Number 4, where am I going?
The liquor store, probably, because I need to soothe my brain.
All of these issues are germane to the issues of life. All people ask these questions. They may not phrase them in that particular phraseology, but all individuals worldwide have always asked these questions, and we're going to explore these questions and hopefully arrive at some plausible academic answers.
How does any of this connect to glow-in-the-dark pterosaurs? Like, he started with that, left it to go talk about random questions, and now what? I want more sparkly Mesozoic flying reptiles, darn it.
This program examines life origins, comparison of life origins.
So wait, now we're off to abiogenesis? This is just a stream of consciousness, isn't it? No wonder I tend not to cover Baugh much.
We've been taught in this modern generation, and I have explored educational paths down dusty trails in distant lands and down jungle trails and sandy beaches.
Get on with it.
Yes, get on with it!
Get on with it.
I've lectured in some of the major universities and some of the colleges of the world. I've lectured to private audiences.
In other words, he was invited by students, and it was in no way an official school function or endorsed by the staff in any way. Got it.
And I've been concerned about these questions. Life origins, comparison of life origins. There was a time when I personally thought humanistic and atheistic thoughts.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
Oh no, quelle horreur! But also, I don't buy it.
There was a time when I believed and taught evolution.
Well, that's just a lie, because to teach something, you have to first understand it. If I say I once taught Japanese, and I'm incapable of actually producing a single original sentence in Japanese, then you can be well assured that I never taught it. Similarly, Carl can't for the life of him accurately present evolutionary biology, so he never taught it. At best, he might have taught his strawman version of it to creationist audiences. And here's the thing, I can't find any mention of any teaching credentials or degrees at all for Carl, nor any record of him having taught in any capacity except as the founder of the Creation Evidence Museum. Even his own bio at his own museum doesn't indicate any degrees or teaching experience beyond speaking engagements as the director of the museum. When even your own bio in your own website won't list your credentials or teaching experience, it's pretty safe to say you don't have any.
What changed my own thinking?
I've yet to see any evidence that Carl's thinking has changed. The earliest time he seems to appear in the public spotlight is when he founded the Creation Evidence Museum in 2 double-wide trailers in Glen Rose, Texas, near the Paluxy River. I do think he is simply making up a false biography for himself because it sounds impressive. If he was some big-shot atheist teacher of evolution who found out that the evidence points away from evolution and then had his come-to-Christ moment. It's basically the same energy as the North Korean press reporting that the dictator de jure always gets a hole-in-one on every hole every time he plays golf, and it was born on the top of a holy mountain as doves descended from the heavens. It's all just propaganda.
Is it possible for evolution to have occurred?
Well, since it currently is observably occurring both in laboratory settings and in the wild, I see no reason to think it didn't occur in the past. In fact, to say that it didn't, one would need to propose some mechanism which would prevent it.
Two of the world's great scholars, astrophysicist Sir Frederick Hoyle, Ph.D.,
not an evolutionary biologist, and the man who was laughed out of respectability when he pretended that Archaeopteryx's feathers were actually just chicken feathers pressed into concrete that had been applied to the slab. Never mind that the counterslab corresponded to the slab perfectly, meaning that this is impossible, and of course the fact that the feathers are pressed into the same limestone that makes up the rest of the rock. Yeah, great pick for a spokesperson, someone who was basically a fraud, or at least fraud adjacent when it came to paleontology.
And Chandra Wickramasinghe, Ph.D.
Oh, another astronomer, and the co-author of the absurd Archaeopteryx is a fake paper. Yeah, another shining light in evolutionary biology. He was also an author on that absurd 2018 paper proposing that cephalopods are aliens despite being morphologically and genetically fully nested within mollusca. That was also not taken seriously by anyone who knew the first thing about cephalopods specifically, or mollusks more broadly.
Explored the issues recently with unlimited funding.
There's only so much money in the world at any given time. That's literally impossible. Carl could at least make his lies somewhat plausible, but no.
Unlimited access to the libraries and laboratories of the world.
No, in fact. As an example, after the absurd Archaeopteryx paper, they were denied further access to the specimen for destructive testing because of how badly they'd botched it the first time. Also, most libraries are open to the public anyway, although somehow I doubt either was allowed into, say, the Vatican archives, which are not open to the public, but which you can get access to if you actually have research that works in there would help with. It's not actually a secret vault full of material never meant to see the light of day, despite what Dan Brown might have you believe.
And they wanted to know the answer to the question, is it possible for life to have originated somewhere in the universe or on planet Earth by naturalistic means?
Okay, everybody, y'all ready for big number, therefore God? It's coming, and I know because these guys are the source for the tornado in a junkyard nonsense. And of course, all of this work they did was before most of the current knowledge of the origin of life's chemistry was established. So they were basing it on more or less nothing, and assuming that chemistry is just random atoms bumping into each other completely randomly, which it most certainly is not.
That's illustrated in the Big Bang Theory.
Nope, the Big Bang and the origin of life are separate things. If life had to have a supernatural origin, that doesn't negate the Big Bang. And if the Big Bang isn't real, that has nothing to do with how the first life arose. Of course, Hoyle is the one who coined the phrase Big Bang as a pejorative because he didn't like it, and he thought it sounded too much like Genesis. Because remember, he was an atheist who wanted the universe to be eternal, because if it had a beginning, that begged the question of what started it. And it seemed a bit too convenient that God was right there with his followers, alleging that he'd always said it was him that started it. That's why the Catholic priest who first proposed the Big Bang was so happy. The steady-state universe was preferred by most atheists and rejected by most theists in favor of a definite timeline of creation. You'd think modern theists would take this as a win, but I guess not, or at least the ones like Carl don't.
Timeline of the universe, the naturalistic concept. And we have paraphrased that academically to show a moment of infinite temperature and inflation, an era of inflation.
We've paraphrased that academically. What in the world does that mean? Carl is just stringing words together. I think when English was uploaded to his ganglia, the transfer didn't go well, and since no one around was a native English speaker, or even human, no one noticed. So he was just sent to Texas with a broken understanding of the English lexicon, but with most of it still rattling around in there anyway. So now he just speaks random words occasionally when his human impersonation algorithms return faulty instructions based on the botched English upload.
The documentation early, according to the postulate of humanists and astrophysicists who work in cosmology, of gravity, a strong force, electromagnetic force, and a weak force.
I have absolutely no idea what he's talking about, especially with the humanism thing. Toss that word salad well, Carl. If anyone wants to have a day of torture, try diagramming the sentence of Boz.
And then a time when the universe became transparent very early in the evolution of the universe according to standard evolutionary model.
So here, I think he's talking about when light and matter became decoupled, which is a part of the Big Bang model, but which has nothing to do with the theory of evolution or any models therein. Because get this, the theory of evolution and cosmological models have essentially nothing to do with each other.
And then a time when galaxies and quasars began to appear.
Quasars are active galactic nuclei. Saying that galaxies and quasars appeared is like saying that humans and human toes appeared. One kind of implies the other.
And the current chaotic universe becoming self-realizing in the mind of man.
Did he just say that the Big Bang says that humans imagined the universe into existence and did so starting with the formation of the first galaxies? I can assure you that the theory says no such thing and that humans were not around to bring the universe into being some 14 to 13 billion years ago, when the first galaxies were forming. You see what I mean when I say that Carl Baugh would fail the Turing test versus most AI chatbots? If you had a text conversation with Baugh and ChatGPT and were asked which one was the real human, I guarantee you'd pick ChatGPT over Carl here. That's assuming the chatbot doesn't just directly out itself as a large language model, which it tends to do.
What are the possibilities that this could occur?
That the universe could have reached its current state of relatively low temperature, low density, and high entropy after an initial hot, dense, and low entropy state? Basically 100%. That's where all the evidence points, even if the current crisis in cosmology means that the timescale for that is more up in the air than we'd like.
After spending more than a decade examining the issues and having at their disposal unlimited funding,
which again is not a thing that happened because it's literally logically impossible. In no possible world can you have unlimited funding for research. You can have more than you'd ever need, but not unlimited. Once a commodity becomes so ubiquitous, it's no longer scarce, it can't be money, and that would happen before it becomes infinite. There's a reason no one pays for groceries in oxygen. There's so much of it that everyone already has all they can reasonably use for basically any purpose. And yet there's far from an infinite amount of oxygen on Earth. Did Carl not get the economic subroutine when his database was being uploaded?
Unlimited access to the great libraries and laboratories of the world.
You think the way Baugh talks about them, that Hoyle and Wickramasinghe were gods or something, or at least the emperors of Earth. As it turns out, they were not.
Sir Frederick Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe came to a conclusion. They stated that life originating in this universe or on planet Earth by naturalistic circumstances has one chance in 10 to the 40,000th power. Let me say that again.
No, I'm not going to let him say it again, but yeah, there it is. Big number, therefore God. Of course, literally no one in the fields of origin of life, or just biology broadly, took this number seriously because it's based on literally nothing.
And then these two great scholars said, let's illustrate how impossible that is.
Get them horses loose! Where's Hickory? Hickory! Hickory!
They said it would be easier for a whirlwind to sweep through a junkyard and assemble a Boeing 747 jet in flight out the other end than it would be for life to have originated on planet Earth or in the universe by natural evolutionary means.
Wake me up when commercial jet planes start reproducing with variability that affects how successful they are at reproduction. Till then, it's a dumb analogy, and Wickramasinghe, Hoyle, and virtually every creationist you've ever heard of is dumb for using it. Or is perhaps just a lying piece of shit. Or hey, maybe both.
Let me illustrate how large that number really is.
Nah, we get it. It's more than the number of electrons in the universe. This is the most basic bitch creationism stuff, and I'm not going to waste my time or the audience's time on some long drawn-out explanation that big number is big. We all get it. The made-up number that was made to be as big as possible and isn't actually meaningful is really big. No one cares. Also, he says that electrons are the smallest particle, which is dumb because electrons don't have a volume near as we can tell, which is also true for all fundamental particles. And if he means just the least massive particle, then I'll point out that neutrinos exist and have way less mass than an electron. So Carl is just dumb all around.
Now, these were not creationists and Christians and theologians analyzing the data.
Yeah, in fact, the reason they didn't like the Big Bang was that it was too Christian-friendly. Odd source to cite. But of course, they also were not chemists or biologists, and their data was just playing games with numbers until they got a big one that confirmed their biases, which is why their work in this area is actually ignored by basically everyone who has a bachelor's or better in any relevant field.
This was Sir Frederick Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe, recognized internationally as great scholars.
I mean, when it comes to nucleosynthesis, sure, but otherwise they're remembered as contrarian nutters who mostly authored nonsense that no one cared about, and who threatened to damage fossils because they thought that limestone and cement are just the same thing.
I have at my disposal the complete works of Charles Darwin.
Okay, they're public domain. That's not special. Also, who cares? They're not exactly on the cutting edge of research. They're from like a century and a half ago. We've moved on. No one is basing their new research on the descent of man or the origin of species.
He's the hero of the evolutionary plot.
No. There's no hero and there's no plot. Just like Lord Kelvin isn't the hero of thermodynamics, he's just the guy who figured out the basics of it. Darwin isn't the hero of evolution. He's just the guy who first published some plausible mechanisms for it. Science isn't a revealed religion like Christianity that relies on the testimony of prophets. Darwin, like Kelvin, is of historical interest at this point. No one in physics or biology is doing their research because they're under the guidance of either person. They are looking at data that come to them and using theoretical frameworks that may have been founded by those two, but have since greatly expanded beyond them and contain no necessary reference to them.
I have the complete works of his bulldog, Huxley.
Somehow even more meaningless.
I have some other works here representing atheistic thinking.
What does that even mean? Does Carl keep a fancy edition of the God Delusion on his set bookshelf or something?
And these are all at the disposal of our committee.
What the f*** is this? Carl lets his buddies read his books. Okay. He's acting like this is ancient Rome when a book had to be hand-copied laboriously by scribes, and having a copy of a work was a mark of prestige, so much so that the wealthy would barter various titles from each other. Anyone can go out and buy a copy of Darwin or Huxley's books, or request one from their local library, even if it takes an interlibrary loan. And while I don't know about 1996 when this came out, here in the year of our Lord 2023, or 4 depending on whether you're watching this on early access or not, they're all just freely available online. Yet further, these books are irrelevant to any current discussion of evolution, because they're all over a century out of date. How does Carl think bragging about his book collection of easily acquired books that are irrelevant anyway helps his case at all? It's just more evidence that he's not actually a human, but an alien programmable biological entity sent here to disrupt the advancement of Homo sapiens on behalf of extra-dimensional intelligences.
By the way, at the Creation Evidences Museum, we have over 50 scholars, consultants, who travel from major universities or their own laboratories and spend time in research with us. We're doing research that one of NASA's engineers who helped design the most successful experiment in space that NASA has biologically performed stated to the press that the research we're doing at the Creation Evidences Museum in low-profile temporary facilities.
So Richard Summers was indeed a NASA engineer, but I can't find a single shred of evidence of his involvement in the Creation Evidence Museum beyond what Carl calls reference number 6, which cites Pueblo, Colorado Press. Does that mean the Pueblo Chieftain, KOAA News 5, Fox 21 News, the Pueblo Star Journal, KFEL, the religious radio station? You might be surprised to find out that there are many press outlets surfacing Pueblo, Colorado, and saying some guy once said a thing to one of them isn't a citation. If you don't know where you got some piece of information, you can't give a reference for it. Just admit you don't know where you heard it. Also, you'd think that if Summers was working with Baugh, he himself could have simply been asked where he said that, and he might have been able to help. Or he could have made his own statement to Baugh. Everything about this makes me think that Summers is in no way affiliated with Baugh, and given that I can't find anything linking him to creationism, I suspect Baugh simply made up the affiliation. No, I don't know this for certain. Maybe Baugh is just really bad at his job, and Summers, despite his mathematical acumen, is in fact a crazy person.
Is more important than all the work he had ever done, even for NASA. And I think before the program is over, if you'll stay with me, you'll understand why this is so important. We're trying to solve the basic issues of life.
But he's not, though. He's trying to fit evidence to his dogmatically derived prior conclusion that Genesis is a mostly literal account of actual past events. He thinks he knows the answers, and he's just trying to make them seem as possible as he can. This is a prime example of motivated reasoning and why it tends to lead you astray.
Life origins. Is creation plausible?
If you mean some kind of general creation where the ultimate cause of reality is a transcendent being, then I don't know. I don't know how to assess that for plausibility, nor do I have an interest in the question as far as this channel is concerned. If you mean special creation as described in Genesis when read literally, no, it's not.
Is evolution plausible?
Yes, in the same way that the internet is plausible. It's a thing that you can see right now. Calling it implausible is to deny reality. But then, Baugh is a young earth creationist, so denying reality is sort of his thing.
Charles Darwin is the hero of the plot.
No, he's not, and we're not going to go over his biography again. I'm skipping until we're done with Chucky D. Just know that Baugh goes off and lies about Darwin and ends by saying chaos is central to the evolutionary concept. Whatever that is.
We have a chart designed by our research, encompassing more than 35 years.
I love that it took more than 35 years, older than some of my audience, to come up with a chart that's basically a mild straw man of most of the science Baugh doesn't like.
And published scholastically by the Creation Evidences Museum, illustrating the theory of evolution. It begins with a Big Bang or a steady state thesis. Either apply.
Nope, evolution starts first with living things, since it's a theory of biodiversity. And the thing is that the fact that Carl knows that steady state or Big Bang both allow evolution means he knows he's lying when he says that some particular theory of cosmogony is part of the theory of evolution. If the Big Bang were part of evolution, then evolution wouldn't be open to a steady state eternal universe, and such a universe, if it were to exist, would falsify evolution. Yet I know, you know, and he knows it would not, meaning that this is not part of the theory of evolution. Carl is admitting in so many words just what I said, that this is a chart of science he doesn't like.
In this naturalistic state, it continues through the nebular hypothesis, which essentially means that debris from the Big Bang coalesced in the area of the solar system about 4.6 billion years ago, according to the evolutionary theory.
No.
The nebula from which the solar system formed is not supposed to have been directly from the Big Bang. That would have been essentially all hydrogen and absolutely nothing heavier than lithium. But look around. You are currently watching this on something made of things like carbon, silicon, copper, tin, silver, bismuth, indium, zinc, titanium, oxygen, and even gold. Those didn't pop out of the Big Bang and required things like supernovas to form. The nebula that the solar system formed from was the debris of some 10 billion years or so of stars forming, burning through their fuel, and exploding, seeding interstellar space with heavy elements. Now, granted, hydrogen remained by far the most common element, but the very existence of heavier atoms precludes debris from the Big Bang being a reasonable explanation for the origin of the protostellar nebula.
Now, I've stated something quite important there. You see, according to the theory of evolution, life processes on planet Earth are the product of debris from a Big Bang.
Nope, the theory of evolution is agnostic and apathetic towards the origin of life. Think about it like a recipe for bread. The recipe doesn't care where the wheat used to make your flour comes from, or what cow was milked to make the butter, or what the lineage is of the Saccharomyces cerevisiae that you put in there to help it rise. If you've got the ingredients for bread, or for evolution, you'll get bread or evolution, no matter how or from where you got the ingredients. By the way, evolution still works even if life had to be or was created miraculously by a god.
What that really means is subliminally, if we accept the naturalistic postulate of evolution,
Evolution neither precludes the supernatural nor is it a postulate, which is a proposition that seems undeniably true and is accepted as such for the purpose of further reasoning. Some actual postulates in science include that the universe works in regular ways, that these regular workings are the same across time and space, and that repeated observations predict future similar observations. Because most God concepts would mean that God could violate any of these if he wants, science generally discounts God not because he can't exist, or because the scientists don't believe in God, although many do not, but because not doing so makes science impossible.
We're really the product of debris. We started as a piece of trash.
Way to use loaded language. The word trash is in reference to the stated purpose of some agency, and the thing referred to as such has no further use for any purpose. For example, if you have some old newspaper and toss it out, it's trash. But if you instead use it to protect your garage floor from spray paint when you spray paint some cosplay prop or a model you're going to paint, suddenly, the same thing isn't trash. If there's no God, then until intelligent agents arise, nothing can be trash. Things would simply exist. If God does exist and he started the universe with the Big Bang with a goal of getting intelligent agents, then nothing that acted to get creatures like us into existence is trash.
From an explosion.
The Big Bang was not an explosion of matter or energy within spacetime. It was an expansion of spacetime itself. These are distinct concepts with only the expansion part having anything in common between the two.
And these life processes continued in progression.
Life processes before life, huh? Sure, that makes sense.
Now, subliminally, that's important in the theory of evolution, that we began as debris, and then life organized itself. We'll talk about that a bit later.
Since so far none of this actually has anything to do with the theory of evolution, I don't think it's important to it. But also, these things are subliminally important? No, there's nothing subliminal going on here. Evolution isn't here to convince you of some moral or philosophical idea about things like the meaning or worth of life.
Finally, man arrived on the scene some 4.6 billion years after the coalescence of debris.
Skipping from abiogenesis to humans, huh? So skipping basically all of evolution, the thing we're supposed to be talking about. Neat.
From that explosion, but that's not the end of the story. According to the theory of evolution, these masses of stars, this solar system, will continue to expand out and out and out until it dies a heat death. Or, if there's enough mass in the universe to cause the universe to collapse back upon itself, then we'll die with a fiery explosion. Either way, there's no hope.
Carl's going to die long before either of those scenarios, no matter what, God or not. Now, this was published in 1996 when the Big Crunch was still a viable option for the ultimate fate of the universe. Since then, we found that it's pretty well precluded, but I won't fault Carl for not being able to see the future. But that the universe left to its own devices will eventually reach thermodynamic equilibrium, aka heat death, doesn't mean there's no God. It doesn't mean you can't have hope either in God or the future. That's a thing for you to worry about. The science isn't concerned about hope. You're a creature whose lifespan is measured in decades, not billions or trillions of years. I can pretty much guarantee you that nothing you've ever done in your whole life has been for the benefit of those who will be here even 1,000 years in the future. Never mind in 1,000,000,000,000 years. You should have hopes for your children, grandchildren, the future of your society in the next few decades or even centuries. If you want eternal hope, go find a religion if you like. Nothing about evolution precludes God.
Hopelessness is written into the very warp and woof of the concept of evolution.
Ooh, nice use of warp and woof. But no, scientific theories aren't about hope or hopelessness. The germ theory of disease, the heliocentric model of the solar system, the theory of general relativity, and the theory of universal gravitation are all just theories just like evolution. And none of them are there to provide you with hope or not. They are simply models that explain reality and predict future observations. None of them incorporated God in their explanatory mechanism, nor confirm some kind of afterlife.
British philosopher Bertrand Russell.
Carl Baugh sure does like talking about people who are not currently evolutionary biologists. You know, the kind of people who might be relevant to this. But okay, what did Mr. Russell have to say that Carl can twist to make evolution seem bad?
Spent a lifetime analyzing the chaos and the hopelessness of evolutionary naturalism. And he finally said, we must settle for unyielding despair. He said, all the high noon of genius all the hopes of man, all the work of individual lives, will ultimately collapse in a fiery explosion, the death of the solar system. And all that's left is unyielding despair.
Cool. I don't care. At best, this is just an argument from consequences. Don't believe in science because it will lead you to a bleak outlook. Hey, guess what? That doesn't mean it's not true. There are lots of things that are true that I wish were not, and that are not true that I wish were. That doesn't mean anything for the truth value of those propositions. I wish I had $1 million in my savings account. I don't. I wish malaria was extinct. It's not.
Well, I'd like to settle for a lot more than that, and I'd like to give you some hope.
I mean, go for it. There are plenty of people with hope more or less the same as Boz who do not reject science. Of course, if this turns into preaching, we'll cut it off. I assume everyone in my audience is aware of the basics of Christianity and that nothing Carl can preach at them will be particularly informative, especially since I suspect that Carl is no more theologically sophisticated than he is scientifically sophisticated.
Will evolution work?
What does that even mean? If you wanted to play a Carl drinking game, just take a drink every time Carl says something that is literally nonsense. As in, there's no thought conveyed in his utterance, because the words as he has arranged them together don't actually mean anything.
According to these two great scholars, Sir Frederick Coyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe, it won't work.
Yeah, two guys who didn't know what they were talking about because they were far outside their fields didn't like evolution. You know what that means for the truth of evolution? Absolutely nothing.
Let's take it further.
Further than what? I guess that's another nonsense statement.
The current modern theorist who has the attention of the entire world is Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard.
I mean, maybe in 1996 he had the attention of the world, but punctuated equilibrium, as he and Eldridge proposed, has basically been rejected today, but okay.
In Natural History, he wrote not long ago, I regard the failure to find a clear vector of progress in life's history as the most puzzling fact of the fossil record.
Okay, that's cool. I don't know what that's supposed to mean for me or evolutionary biology, but sure.
Another scholar, Professor L.B. Halstead, an atheist, wrote in Nature,
Oh, another question that probably won't mean anything for evolution being true or not.
Nothing directly linking us with the rest of the world.
Well, that quote was already 16 years old when this video came out, and now it's been about 23 years? And hey, guess what? Homo heidelbergensis is probably a direct antecedent to Homo sapiens. But even if it weren't, what's the point here? The fact remains that evolutionary biology predicted that we would find morphological intermediates between relatively derived humans and the relatively less derived African apes. Special creation predicted that we should not find such things because humans are allegedly a special creation with no ancestral connection to other life forms. But further, given that the fossil record is incomplete and that even if we did find a species from millions of years ago that was directly ancestral to modern humans, we could never know that, this is what we should expect. The fact that perfect knowledge is unavailable or that the fossil record is incomplete doesn't negate what we do know about human ancestry.
L.B. Halstead, an atheist, wrote in Nature, there are no actual fossils directly antecedent to man.
No, that is a dishonest reading of what was said. Nothing directly antecedent in the fossil record. Human genetics directly links humans to other apes, whether it be in terms of chromosomal architecture, shared endogenous retroviral insertions, shared pseudogenes, shared orphan genes, etc. The fossil record indirectly links humans in ways that correspond well to the genetic links. Taken together, there is no reasonable conclusion to draw but that humans share ancestry with other apes.
We've been taught academically that mutations have produced these ever-ascending spiral forms of life until finally, here we are.
I have no idea what spirals have to do with this, but no, evolution is not about things ascending some great ladder of being. It's about organisms adapting to their environments with a background of change as a result of things like drift. The fact that humans like to rank things by how similar they are to humans is not something about evolution, it's something about humans.
But it just won't work. Again, Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard University and American Museum of Natural History wrote, a mutation doesn't produce major new raw material.
Tell that to the bacteria in the Lenski long-term E. coli experiment, which managed to evolve an entirely new metabolic pathway through well-documented mutations. At least this was all done before Gould died, so he could actually object to creationists lying about his stance on various topics, and object he did.
It doesn't make a new species by mutating that species. That's a common idea people have. that evolution is due to random mutations. A mutation is not the cause of evolutionary change. And end quote.
So this seemed like something I really needed more context on, and since I have a PDF with all of Baugh's citations, which is linked in the description, I thought I'd take a look at this. It's from an unrecorded lecture given by Gould, and the quotation only seems to exist in collections of quotes by so-called evolutionists on creationist websites, so essentially it only exists as a product of quote mines. There is no transcript of the talk that I can find, nothing published in which Gould uses these words that I can find, and given what I know of Gould's opinions, beliefs, and work, I find it hard to believe he even said this. I'm going to have to say that I don't think this is even something Gould said, and if it is, then I would invite creationists to provide some verifiable source for it that contains the transcript of that talk, and not just some out-of-context version from some guy's memory, or more likely, imagination.
Well, if it's not the cause of evolutionary change,
well, it's the cause of variation in genotypes, that is, the raw material on which selection and drift act, so it's a fundamental cause, but it's not sufficient on its own.
what is the cause of evolutionary change? Punctuated equilibria is the current school of thought.
Punctuated equilibrium was never the consensus view, and in 1996 it was already pretty fringe. By this point, here in the 2020s, the original version proposed by Eldredge and Gould is basically nowhere to be found in the literature. It's been shown false, and at best a ghost of it remains in the fact that sometimes isolated populations undergo rapid evolution before being reintroduced into a wider range. But things like species selection and other distinctive aspects of punctuated equilibrium are basically no longer regarded as even potentially valid. I think the only reason Baugh is concentrating so much on it is that it was popular in pop-sci venues, and that because Gould was at odds with the evolutionary biology consensus, he produced lots of quotes that, when taken out of context, seem friendly to special creation, even though they're not.
And it simply says, and Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldredge are the designers of this concept, that thought simply states that you can't really observe evolution occurring.
No, that's not what they said. They said that evolution would generally, but not always, be hard to detect at the species level in the fossil record, but not in larger taxa. For example, Gould acknowledged and even talked about transitional forms between higher taxa. Further, even when Gould was alive, and even more now, we have simply watched evolution occur in real time. Punctuated equilibrium was created to explain why we don't have smooth transitions between, say, all the fossil horses, but it was not needed to explain the transitions between basal paracerdactyls and equids versus tapiromorphs, which is actually already pretty well established in the fossil record.
Since there's no clear vector of progress...
Vector of progress is a made-up term that has no meaning in evolutionary biology. So sure, there's no clear vector of progress. Much like Carl Baugh's suit is entirely lacking a scalar of amplitude.
No clear line of ascent in the fossil record. You find individual life forms, separate and distinct and functional.
I guess y'all know what time it is.
Since there's no clear line of ascent, evolution can't really be observed. It's off on the side. It occurs quickly by evolutionary standards, but it manifests itself in the mainstream as a new variation or new life form, or ultimately a new species. Well, that's a very convenient thought You'll never find the evidence because it's hidden.
Actually, no. Punctuated Equilibrium made specific testable predictions about the genetics and population dynamics of not just fossil, but also extant species. It turns out that they did not bear out, and that's why the idea is largely rejected now.
It appears to me that the concept of evolution is really based on faith, not fact.
This non-peer-reviewed book from 1984 is only seemingly available from used booksellers and is not available online. Further, this quotation is only on yet more creationist quote mine hoards that I can see, so once again, it's a useless citation.
In fact, I brought from the Humanist January-February 1983 edition, Religion for a New Age, a statement.
I couldn't possibly care less. We're skipping until he's done with the Humanist Society likening their ideas to a religion. Cool, let's see actual arguments, not just atheists are mean poopy heads.
But one leading evolutionary scholar admitted that his friends were absolutely sure that evolution was true if they could only find the evidence. There are very fine, well-meaning educators who assume that the theory of evolution and the concept of creation are really compatible. They assume that you can really hold to both.
Hey, it's the majority position among Christians. Neat.
But leading humanists and evolutionists admit rather readily that it isn't quite like that. In fact, their intentions are very clear.
And we're back to whining about humanists. I just wanted to note that Karl Bott does recognize that there are theist teachers out there who do not see science as directly contradicting a belief in God or in general creation. He seems not to like this fact, but it remains true regardless.
In our research at the Creation Evidences Museum, with scholars from major universities participating,
remember, research that includes things like lying about growing piranhas in a hyperbaric chamber making them grow huge, when in fact the fish were normal-sized pacu fish, which are related to piranhas, but in the same way that you would be lying if you said that raising a red fox in a hyperbaric kennel would turn it into a maned wolf.
We've uncovered some very startling evidence. I want to point out some of that evidence to you today.
Yeah, that would be nice, especially since we're already in episode 2.
Now, in order for you to recognize the importance of this evidence, let me take you again to the chart which we have formulated.
Oh good, a grainy, hard-to-read, low-res chart. Just what I was hoping for.
This chart expresses the concept of evolution as the evolutionists themselves desire it be expressed, beginning with the Big Bang.
Which isn't evolution, meaning that this is not how anyone who knows what they're talking about would describe evolution. Off to a great start with this one.
The nebular hypothesis of debris from that Big Bang coalescing in our solar system area.
Again, not evolution, and again, describing the nebula from which the solar system formed as debris from the Big Bang is simplified to the point of being dishonest. It was not simply directly formed by the Big Bang, and calling it debris is poisoning the well with emotional language, since debris implies that something is the useless leftover of some destructive event, which is not what the Big Bang is anyway.
And then about 4.6 billion years ago, life got down to earnest. About 3.5 billion years ago, early bacteria evolved.
I could nitpick about what exactly is meant by bacteria, but whatever, it's fine.
About 550 million years ago, according to the evolutionary theory, trilobites, Calomini trilobites, evolved. Then about 250 million years ago, lepidodendron, a plant that today is a club moss.
Yeah, that's exactly how I'd characterize all of evolution. Bacteria, trilobites, and lepidodendron. That's it. Mollusks, chordates, birozoans, hemichordates, nematodes, archaeans, algae? Who cares?
Reaching no more than 18 inches in stature, but found in the fossil record up to 120 feet tall, lepidodendron.
I'll just point out that the modern club moss and ancient lepidodendron trees are related, but they are not in any way the same thing. Once again, we're back to the same mistake that Ba made when confusing the flesh-eating piranhas with normal pacu that grow fast and big. It's not the same organism, but it's related. So far as Carl is concerned, if one can get big, then so can the other one. If only we had antediluvian conditions. Never mind the fact that we can see size variation in related organisms now in the same climatic conditions. That's not important. Carl has lies to peddle, and he's doing it for Jesus.
And then, about 228 million years ago, the dinosaurs arrived. About 100 million years ago, the dinosaurs at Glenrose roamed. Then about 6 million years ago, the great cats arrived. And finally, about 3.5 million years ago, man arrived and looked back on all of the evolving process and could appreciate it.
Yep, the whole history of evolution comes down to 6 groups of organisms: bacteria, trilobites, lepidodendron, dinosaurs, cats, and humans. I mean, what else really matters? Pterosaurs, crocodilians, cephalopods, flowering plants? Those things are lame. I can't imagine a single person who studies evolutionary biology thinking that this chart is a good summary of what they believe about science. It starts way before evolution, it seems too orthogenic, and it's leaving out almost everything. If I didn't know better, I'd think this chart was made by someone who wanted to mislead, not educate people about evolution. But that couldn't be Carl.
We excavated one at Glenrose with Nova filming over my shoulder during that excavation. About 250 million years ago, according to the evolutionary theory, lepidodendron arrived. Well, let me show you what we have excavated. An original, in situ, academic excavation.
That's not how those words work. Carl has the same energy as the kid who's really dumb but incorrectly uses big words, thinking that that will make him seem smart. It doesn't work for that kid, or for Carl.
In the very same rock stratum, the same layer, living at the same time originally, we excavated 2 trilobites. One was a calamine. Now, according to the theory of evolution, that trilobite lived a short time 550 million years ago.
He's only off by about 100 million years, no big deal.
In the same layer, living at the same time, we excavated a big lepidodendron that, according to evolution, lived only 250 million years ago.
Again, off by about 100 million years, as lepidodendron evolved in the Carboniferous and then lasted until the end of the Permian. But further, there were lots of North American species of trilobites in the Mississippian and Pennsylvanian, which is how the Carboniferous is split up in North America. The American Museum of Natural History lists 50 trilobites known in that time period, and 2 Permian trilobite species. So what are the chances that Carl Baugh actually did the morphological analysis to say that this was actually a calamine trilobite, and not, for example, Dynamopigi or Amua? 2 trilobites that we know coexisted in North America with lepidodendron. Well, given that this man doesn't know what evolution is, or what a pacu fish is, I'm guessing he did no analysis beyond just eyeballing it. And you'll notice that so far he doesn't have a source for this, like he did for his quote mines. Maybe that'll change, but until then, it's just the word of a creationist so crazy, even Answers in Genesis wants something to do with him.
So we've brought these tangible life forms from 550 million up to 250 million years of age.
Even if he weren't wrong about those numbers, there's still no evidence he did anything for the source. Just the bald assertion.
But it's better still. We excavated a big Acrocanthosaurus dinosaur. I have the privilege of being the discoverer of and the excavation of the largest Acrocanthosaurus and the most complete Acrocanthosaurus that ever lived, or at least that has been found so far.
That's certainly a claim. Now the thing is, it does seem that Carl and some church friends did find an Acrocanthosaurus on the banks of the Paluxy River. Let's read the report of Glenn Kubin, who did research on the Paluxy dinosaur tracks and has been long familiar with Baugh and his so-called work. This is from an email sent to his mailing list and is preserved on reptiles.net and is a first-hand account. Quote, getting to the Acrocanthosaurus claim, finally, yes, Baugh or some associates did in 1986 find an Acrocanthosaurus skeleton, or most of one, along the south bank of the Paluxy River, several miles west of Glenrose. Had the excavation been handled properly, it would have been a very important find. It evidently was a fairly complete skeleton and was located close to the track layers. Also, few other Acrocanthosaurus skeletons are known. Unfortunately, Baugh utterly botched the excavation, so we shall never know exactly what was found. He and a local church group tried to excavate the entire find within a couple days, covered many of the bones with plaster without covering them with paper first, and stepped all over on many of the smaller bones. By the time I got to the site, only a couple days after the initial discovery, they had damaged or destroyed most of the bones. One large bone, partially embedded in marl and partially in a limestone layer, was the only recognizable bone left when I arrived. Baugh arrived carrying several gallons of hydrochloric acid, announcing that he was going to burn the bone out of the rock. I could not bear to stay and watch. Juan Langston of the University of Texas also arrived at the scene shortly after the discovery, but so much damage had been done by that time that he refused to get involved. Although the skeleton was found right on the riverbank, which is apparently state property because of easement laws, no one at the state level acted to stop the excavation at the time, nor has since taken any steps to confiscate the material or otherwise pursue the matter. Since the dig, Baugh has apparently done no work on the bones and has refused to turn them over to a competent institution or preparator. The result is that an important find has evidently been lost to science. Thus, we may never know for sure how good or large the specimen was. Based on the size of the large bone I saw, a hip bone, I would say that it was an average size adult. I have photos of the exposed bone and some other photos of participants in the dig, in case anyone wants to try judging the size of the animal. It may be true that this was the largest specimen, but that would not be saying much since few Acrocanthosaurus specimens are known. However, in 1993, I saw a largely complete Acrocanthosaurus being prepared at the Black Hills Institute of Geological Science, and it seemed to be at least as large as the bone I saw at Baugh's dig, and in others' photos from the dig." End quote. Note that there are indeed some typos and that I have preserved them. So yeah, this is not a story of Carl Baugh making a wonderful scientific discovery. This is a story of Carl Baugh utterly destroying a priceless fossil because of incompetence. Oh, and it was illegal to boot.
He looked a lot like Tyrannosaurus rex.
In what way? I mean, they were both large-bodied theropods, so that brings some necessary similarity, but the profile of the skull is different, the shape of the neural spines across the spine is different, the tooth shapes are different, Acrocanthosaurus had proportionally much larger arms, the digit number on the manus is different. Honestly, these two animals are about as different as two large-bodied terrestrial theropods from the Cretaceous could be. Oh, right, I forgot. Carl doesn't know all about dinosaurs, so if it's big and bitey, it's basically a T-Rex.
Except he had a Texas flair. He had spikes down his spinal column all the way near the tip of his tail. That's how he got his name, high-spined lizard.
Now, I don't think it's likely, but I don't know that we can technically rule that out for T-Rex, and reconstructions of Acrocanthosaurus do often include a row of iguana-like spines, but the animal is actually named for the tall neural spines that are part of its vertebrae and would not have poked out in real life, since they were attachment points for ligaments and muscles that helped keep the spine in the right shape and move the whole axial skeleton. I feel like if I asked Carl what a neural spine is, he would not be able to answer me correctly.
And the one we excavated stood about 20 feet tall and 40 feet long.
Cool story, bro. Too bad no one has ever been given access to what remains of the find to verify anything about it.
The curator of Dallas Museum of Natural History came down to see some of the bones. I showed him one of the large vertebrae. He looked at me and he said, "Dr. Baugh, it is true then, Acrocanthosaurus was as large as any Tyrannosaurus rex that ever lived." So we excavated one.
I decided to go to Morganville, which is what they call Shelbyville in those days. So I tied an onion to my belt, which was the style at the time. Now, to take the ferry cost a nickel, and in those days, nickels had pictures of bumblebees.
He was found
on
at
'em.
Glenrose,
Give me
and
5
those
feet.
rocks are assigned 100 million years in age.
It's actually Upper Aptian to Lower Albanian stages in the early Cretaceous, which sets the time of the Glen Rose Formation, where the Paluxy tracks are found, to 115 to 105 million years ago.
Watch closely what we've done. We've brought into one time frame life forms that supposedly lived 550 million years ago, up to live with life forms that supposedly lived 250 million years ago,
Well, that was claimed, and literally no evidence was provided.
up to life forms that supposedly lived 100 million years ago.
Notice how we didn't say anything about finding the Acrocanthosaurus with the trilobite or the lepidodendron? That's because even the people who seem to have been at the Acrocanthosaurus dig didn't see anything of the kind. That's because he didn't. He found an animal known from the Aptian stage of the early Cretaceous in rocks that are consistent with that age, and he maybe found a trilobite at an appropriate layer, but that is much more up in the air. Because I can't even find a story about that that's corroborated by anyone independent of Baugh. And of course, Baugh can't be trusted.
But it gets better. In the very same rock layer, we excavated 7 cat prints. I mean, Texas-size cat prints.
We already know that Carl has a history of lying, accepting fake footprints, not knowing where in the geological column he is, and that he has no willingness to let other people check up on his work. So holding up a cartoonish cat print doesn't convince me of anything. Where was it found? How do we know it wasn't a fake? Where was the description published? Were in situ pictures taken? Is there a site map? What stratigraphic analysis was done to link it to the Glen Rose Formation, or whatever formation the alleged trilobite was allegedly found in? I don't know, and I don't think the answers are forthcoming from Carl.
This is the Burdick print. We have the original of this cat print that has been sectioned. We can see the lamination, pressure lines in it very conclusively.
That's not even the Burdick print. The Burdick print is a carving done in the 1930s by George Adams and is a carving of a human print. This man can't even keep his own bullshit straight.
We excavated 7 cat prints. This one is 7 inches across at the flange. This cat would have stood about 6 feet at the shoulders. Now, according to the theory of evolution, the great cats didn't arrive until 6 million years ago. But we found that they lived simultaneous with the dinosaurs.
Wow, that would indeed be a big deal and a big problem for the theory of evolution. Now it's time to submit the find to peer review so we can see if it's true. Oh, what's that? Carl has never submitted any of his so-called evidence to peer review and credulously accepts obvious fakes as real prints? Oh. Well, that's not great. And remember, this stuff is so absurd that not even people like Andrew Snelling will countenance it.
Now, that certainly disrupts the evolutionary concept of things.
This is the epitome of big if true.
Here we have the great cats in the same layer with the dinosaurs, with Lepidodendron, and with the trilobites. Finally, in the very same rock layer, we excavated 57 human footprints. How important is that?
Not at all, because it didn't. The so-called man tracks are dinosaur tracks and fakes. Let's hear from Creation Ministries International and see what they have to say in their article, Arguments We Think Creationists Should Not Use. In that article, we find this, quote, some prominent creationist promoters of these tracks have long since withdrawn their support. Some of the allegedly human tracks may be artifacts of erosion of dinosaur tracks obscuring the claw marks. There is a need for properly documented research on the tracks before we would use them to argue for the coexistence of humans and dinosaurs. Research to date has not been promising about the tracks. End quote.
2 of the nation's leading evolutionary scholars, Drs. Milne and Schaefersman, admitted in Journal of Geological Education that if we could prove just that man and dinosaur lived contemporaneously, that would destroy the entire concept of evolution.
If we discover them living together in the Mesozoic or something, but a late surviving non-avian dinosaur wouldn't do that at all. And it wouldn't even be all of evolution. We know some of the theory is true just on the basis of watching evolution happen in real time. That would remain intact. But we would know that there had to be much more to the story than we thought, and that our deep time models do not work.
Well, we've done a lot more than that. We've shown not only that man and dinosaur lived contemporaneously, but that the great cats, the lepidodendron plants, the trilobites all lived simultaneously. Let's examine some of this evidence.
That would require independent labs and researchers, and this doesn't seem to be filmed in a lab, and researchers apart from Baugh are conspicuous in their absence.
I brought to class, or to this discussion today, the original of the Burdick print.
Right, which is what this is, a fake human print. It's not the cat print that he identified as the Burdick print beforehand.
Now this footprint is 14 inches long. It's in a slab of rock, the original slab of rock, that of course is much larger. If you examine it very closely, you will see the ridges where it was chiseled out of the river. You'll see where they started to chisel much closer to the toes when they marked their score line. Then they realized they were going to get too close to the flange and the little toe, so they marked the score line further out. Now this is 14 inches long. Someone in this audience might suggest that's too big to have been of human origin.
Yup, but let's let Carl cook.
Well, let me show you that just yesterday in the Dallas Morning News, There was an article showing the foot size of Lorenzo Williams of the Dallas Mavericks. And his foot size is 14 inches. His shoe is a little longer than 14 inches long.
Cool, Cretaceous basketball player. But, is that what we have? Let's see what Glenn Kubin, who we've already mentioned, and Greg Wilderson, a senior geologist with the University of Texas, have for us, having actually examined the Burdick print. After examining the history of the carving, its morphological coloration, the cross-section, and even algal growth, the conclusion was, quote, "The Burdick track contains severe anatomic errors as well as abruptly truncated subsurface algal structures indicating that it is a carving. The carver probably took a piece of limestone from a local group and carved a print, or enhanced an existing vague depression, on what was originally the bottom of the rock. The knowledge that similar tracks were carved in Glen Rose and lack of in situ documentation for the track further undermine the claims that the track is genuine. Creationists would do well to abandon the Burdick track as anti-evolutionary evidence."
That shows that man certainly has the capability of making a print that large.
Cool, but it's still a fake.
I personally knew Max Palmer. Max Palmer stood 8 feet.
Yeah, we get it. Tall people exist. Who cares? Moving on.
Is this a genuine footprint?
No, and even other creationists know it.
We sectioned it. You can see the areas where it was sectioned. A very fine university some years ago sectioned in this area alone across the flange, assuming that the depression lines would show there better. However, in our research, we found that man is very unique. Programmed from the brain, he walks in a unique fashion. He first plants his heel, and then he rocks the foot forward, planting the ball and the great toe in a lateral motion, and then he rocks the foot to the side, and then he depresses the toes in forward locomotion. That is a unique mannerism. It begins here, transfers there, and forward. That's a unique motion of mankind. Therefore,
this was a very long-winded and confusing way to describe how human footfalls work, but okay.
We knew we had to section across the heel to see if the greater pressure would be there, because the initial pressure line certainly should be there. I brought, for our discussion today, photographs of the sectioned area, this immediate area. This is the actual footprint. There's no question that the clear lamination lines of pressure are shown. That is a genuine footprint.
Kubin and Wilkerson have a whole part of their publication talking about the cross-sections, and unlike Carl, they actually have credentials on this, and Wilkerson has actual publications to his name. Here's what they have. Quote, "During the 1970s, the track was sectioned longitudinally near the left edge and diagonally through the ball. In the 1990s, the track was sectioned twice across the toes and once through the heel. These 5 sections would expose 10 surfaces. Both surfaces of the ball section and one of the longitudinal surfaces, on the track side, were inspected and photographed by one of us, Kubin, and the ICC in 1986. Photographs of some of the several recently exposed surfaces were examined by both authors at the 1990 ICC in Pittsburgh. One of us, Wilkerson, requested from MIOS permission to examine photographs of the remaining surfaces and was denied. The inspected sections show elongated semicircular stromatolite algal structures. Some of the algal structures happen to partially overlap some of the toe depressions, prompting Patton to claim that the structures are pressure lines. However, the structures are distributed throughout much of the subsurface without regard to the location of the toe marks or other print depressions. Further, when the structures meet the print depression, they are truncated by the depression and/or not in proper coincidence with it. The nature of these structures is further described below. Although it is uncertain exactly where the slab on which the Burdick print originated, its general composition is typical of various limestone beds in the Glen Rose area. Moreover, one can deduce from certain algal features that the slab was already detached from its host formation when the print was carved. Indeed, as will be explained further below, the algal features seem to indicate that the print occurs on what was originally the underside of the original slab, providing still further evidence of carving. Limestones are often formed by calcium-secreting algae. Algal limestones are distinguished from other types of limestones by their characteristic small-scale stromatolite structure. The algal colonies grow upward in concentric layers that have a teardrop shape. The narrow end of the teardrop points downward. This orientation can be used to deduce the up direction in the rock. Many stromatolites from 1/4 to 3/4 inch in diameter are seen in the cross sections of the Burdick track. The truncation of these structures at the bottom edges of the print indicate that the complete structures once existed, but have been partially removed. The stromatolite morphology, with upward rather than downward curvature, indicates that the sedimentological up direction of the rock slab is opposite the up direction of the print. In other words, the print was probably carved on the bottom of the slab. End quote. Far from demonstrating that the print is real, these cross-sections reveal that it was upside down. I'm sure Carl has a model for how people can walk upside down underground during a worldwide flood.
One leading evolutionary humanistic scholar in this area said, "All right, you've shown that that's a clear human footprint." He had previously said it was a carving.
I'll take stories that didn't happen for 500, Alex.
He said, obviously that's a footprint, a genuine footprint. However, he said it's a dinosaur footprint on which someone has carved toes. He admitted that it was a genuine footprint because of the lamination pressure lines.
Weird how there's no citation, and no, the damn footprint is upside down. It's not a carved out dinosaur print.
Then we sectioned the forward area twice to make sure that the data was consistent. You can see we sectioned there and forward. In both lines, we found a very clear compression under the great toe.
Here's a picture of the toe area cross-section. Note the upside-down stromatolite that simply truncates at the surface of the print, indicating that there was no pressure applied by a foot when this was deposited, as that would distort the stromatolite, and that the print is upside down. There are no evident pressure lines. Carl is either just colossally stupid or colossally dishonest, or both.
We found a dispersion of pressure, which is common when crystalline material is compressed with another indenture. We found under each of the toes indication that pressure had been applied.
Pro tip, pressure distorts structures in unlithified sediment. It does not truncate them.
This is a genuine footprint.
A claim actually disproven by Carl's own research.
Do you understand the importance of this footprint?
Yes, the importance is that people were hard up for cash during the Great Depression, and George Andrew knew that gullible people would buy fake prints, so he made a bunch from the Glen Rose limestone and sold them. I don't blame him.
If we could prove that man and dinosaur lived contemporaneously, with no precursors leading up, no life forms graduating to man and dinosaur living either in the distant past or the recent past.
Recent past wouldn't help the creationists. Nothing about evolution demands that certain organisms go extinct after some period of time. And of course, dinosaurs didn't go extinct.
It would have the same devastating effect.
For the ancient past part, then yes, that would be a pretty big blow to the theory of evolution as we currently understand it. Too bad the best evidence we saw so far is an upside-down fake footprint.
But not only do we have human footprints, we excavated, by the way, 7 of this exact stature, 14 inches in length.
The reason he's not showing them to you is that other than this and another fake, the Delk print, the other alleged man tracks are in fact gallimimed dinosaur tracks, and lack the obvious human-like features that the Delk and Burdick tracks badly imitate. This makes them far less convincing, and they are the tracks that Creation Ministries International were talking about when they mentioned dinosaur tracks with obscured claws because of erosion.
We have some other things that I think you'd like to see. I brought with me today some treasures.
I hope it's pirate treasure.
First, the theory of evolution is taught consistently and academically around the world.
I swear to God, Carl Ball's brain is powered by ChatGPT. It has no idea what's going on and is just pulling words out of a word bank based on a statistical model of what word seems like it should come next.
We have in safety deposit a very rare and special fossil. This fossil is Hesperopithecus Harold Cooki, commonly known as the Nebraska man.
You mean a peccary. A peccary that was mistaken for an ape tooth. For basically a few months.
Well, The Nebraska man was used in the famous Scopes evolution trial in Dayton, Tennessee by Clarence Darrow.
Actually, no, Hesperopithecus wasn't mentioned in the trial at all and was only mentioned by Byron, the prosecutor, in the papers to demean and belittle the find, which I guess is fair enough, as the nature of the tooth as belonging to a peccary was discovered right before the trial started.
Who had behind him the scholarship of America's leading paleoanthropologist, Henry Fairfield Osborn of Harvard University and American Museum of Natural History.
Yep, the science and scientists were on the side of Darrow. They remain on the side of evolution in more recent trials like Kitzmiller v. Dover, which rejected intelligent design as creationism in disguise, inherently religious, non-scientific, and banned from U.S. classrooms.
And Dr. Henry Fairfield Osborn stated, "This is the best evidence for evolution that we have on the American continents."
A guy was wrong in the past. Oh no!
He said, that clearly is graduation from an ape to a man. It's an ape graduating to a man. And if you look at it very closely, it certainly looks like a human molar, but not quite like a human molar.
Probably why it was such an easy mistake for even Henry Fairfield Osborn to make. But also note that he was one of the ones who discovered that it wasn't a human in the first place.
It looks like an ape's molar, but not quite like an ape's molar. So according to this great scholar in his day in 1925, that's from an ape graduating, progressing, evolving to become a human being. Now, because of that evidence in the trial,
which didn't come up once in the trial transcripts. The transcripts are 339 pages long, and nowhere is Nebraska or Hesperopithecus to be found. I have the transcripts linked in the description. Feel free to download the PDF and check yourself.
the day was ultimately won for evolution. Evolution was thereby introduced into the American public school system.
Evolution certainly won in the court of public opinion, but the defense, the pro-evolution side, lost the case because, as a matter of fact, Scopes did admit to having violated the law. It wasn't a legal consequence of the trial that evolution was taught widely after the case, but it was more a matter of the social fallout.
And ultimately into the school systems around the world.
I guarantee that the rest of the world does not care enough about some trial of a substitute teacher in Tennessee to make curriculum decisions based on that trial.
Primarily because of the evidence of this fossil.
Which again, didn't come up once in the trial.
It was 1925. The original discovery had been made in 1923. In 1926, Harold Cook, the geologist who made the original discovery, went back to western Nebraska.
This is incorrect and likely a lie to make the timeline for his narrative about the importance of Nebraska Man to the Scopes trial work. This actually occurred in the spring of 1925, which is why by the time of the later trial in 1925, Nebraska Man had already been discovered to be a peccary.
Excavated in the same gravel pit and found the rest of the skeleton, the rest of the teeth. In fact, this is one of the other teeth. This is not the tooth used at the trial or referred to at the trial.
There is no such tooth.
But this is from the very same jaw of the tooth used at the trial. Harold Cook went back to Nebraska, excavated, found the rest of the skeleton, including the jaws and the teeth, with one missing. He had the one that missed, and it fit perfectly. Now, I wonder, did it turn out to be an ape, or a man, or an ape man? None of the above. It turned out to be a pig.
No, it turned out to be a peccary. They're pigs in the same way that raccoons are bears, which is to say, they're not, although they are closely related.
The admission was not made publicly until years later. And
here's something fun. The source Carl uses for this contradicts him and says that it was Osborn and Albert Thomas who went excavating in 1926, not Harold Cook, who of course did follow up in 1925 before the trial, but it also describes the later 1925 excavation by Osborn and Thomas as starting in the summer, while the trial started July 21st, 1925, meaning that Osborn probably knew it wasn't an ape tooth by the time the trial started, which might explain why Hesperopithecus never came up in the trial.
Finally, the admission was made that Hesperopithecus was found to be peccary.
I guess he does know it's not a pig. By years, he means 17 months. That's when the paper he referenced was published, December 1927.
Finally, the admission was made that Hesperopithecus was found to be peccary. The average individual would have no idea what peccary would mean.
Carl lives in a place where peccaries are native. I do too. They are not mysterious creatures. They're basically the New World's answer to pigs.
Well, it simply means pig, an extinct pig. By the way, there is currently a variety of pig in one of the primitive areas of the world that produces a molar like that.
Well, they're not pigs, but this just in. Texas is one of the primitive areas of the world, according to Carl Baugh. I have my problems with Texas, but I wouldn't call it one of the primitive areas of the world.
That's from a pig.
Not a pig.
But the evolutionary concept continued.
Yeah, one misidentified tooth didn't bring down evolution. Weird, right? Just like one fake teriyaki-flavored arc didn't bring down young Earth creationism.
I brought some other things. I wanted you to get something from our discussion today.
I haven't gotten anything informative so far, but I have gotten content out of the so-called discussion. I guess that's something.
The question is, did we arrive by evolution or by creation?
¿Por qué no las dos?
You've learned that leading scholars have admitted that evolution simply will not work.
No, Bob misrepresented those experts and scholars.
But they say that's the only plausible explanation we have. Well, is it?
Yes.
Other leading scholars have admitted that if we could show that man and dinosaur lived contemporaneously, that would destroy the concept of evolution and verify that the entire thing had to be by direct creation.
No, actually, what could do that is humans existing long before they could have evolved. The dinosaurs are completely irrelevant to it. That's why every time creationists get excited about alleged extant non-avian dinosaurs because they think it will disprove evolution, they're just showing how little they understand evolution.
I brought a priceless artifact for you to see. This was excavated near Glenrose in the very same layer with the dinosaur footprints in the Walnut Shale, which is adjacent to the Comanche, which is adjacent to the Glenrose and Biloxi formations of limestone.
Oh great, the Glenrose ladyfinger. This ought to be dumb. And that's just my name for it. You will probably only find pastry if you Google that. Also, interestingly, it seems Bob might have actually stolen this particular bit of rock, so that's cool.
I've had 20 different medical scholars analyze this fossil. It's priceless.
First, bullshit. No, he hasn't. Second, there's no evidence it's even a fossil. Third, just because you stole it doesn't mean it's priceless.
It's a fossilized human finger.
That has a concave top surface, a nail that's the wrong size, and no internal parts that would indicate that it's a finger.
Notice the fingernail, the cuticle, the taper.
It's just an ovoid furrow around one end of the rock. There's nothing beyond the basic shape and pareidolia to indicate that it's a fingernail.
Notice the medial joint.
That's just a crack in the rock.
We sectioned it and found inside the replaced bone, the replaced cartilaginous ligaments, and the replaced epidermis, the skin.
None of that is evident on screen or on closer inspection. It's just got some concentric rings, meaning it's more likely a concretion than any kind of fossil.
All perfectly preserved.
Apparently that's creationist for not at all evident.
I've had 20 different medical scholars analyze it.
You wouldn't know them, because they go to a different school.
All 20 have confirmed that it is a human digit.
Weird how no citation is on screen for that one. You'd think that if you got 20 medical professionals to all sign off on this identification, they'd actually write that down somewhere where we could check who they are and what their reasoning is.
From the medial joint forward, some have expertise to state that it is the fourth finger in the left hand of a girl.
That CT scan image doesn't show joints or bones. This just isn't a finger.
How do we know it came from a girl?
We don't because it didn't. It's just a bit of rock that was never a human finger.
There are two ways we can determine that. First, because of the taper. We men normally have a more blunt profile to the end of our finger. This is a more tapered profile.
This is not a reliable way to sex a digit. In fact, there is no reliable way to sex a digit.
But look very closely. The back section of the replaced nail
which somehow has a proximal end that's too small to produce the distal end of the nail, meaning it's impossible for this to be a fossilized finger.
Is flattened. Now, men do not produce flattened nails, but ladies, because of a beneficial bacterium, once every 28 days are susceptible to a flattening of the nails.
Because of bacteria, menstruation causes flat fingernails. Not only is that completely not true, I have no idea where he even came up with that.
Once every 28 days, a lady is susceptible to a beneficial bacterium that flattens the back portion of the nail. That's part of her metabolic profile.
Fun how that's not cited at all, and I think you know why.
This is a human finger and a lady's finger.
It's just a rock.
Now, there are other things about this which are quite interesting. It's slightly swollen, just slightly. And then it is slightly flattened. That would indicate to us a number of things. If you die by drowning, the metabolism of the human body inevitably causes that body to bloat and float.
Yeah, but that's the temporary result of decay gases. Gases tend not to preserve well as fossils. In fact, no soft tissue does either. So there isn't even a plausible mechanism for the permineralization of this finger. Also, if the finger were crushed by flood debris, it would have let the gases escape, especially since the finger is apparently severed, which would also let out the gas that is apparently bloating the finger.
And if you're caught in a flood, then you will have compression of the members of your body.
It's really hard right now not to tell a massive joke about the word member, but that might leave me with a bit of a mess, and YouTube doesn't like it.
Now, I have often been asked the question, is it possible for soft tissue to be preserved? It is rare, but it's possible for soft tissue such as the fingernail, the bone, cartilaginous ligaments, the epidermis, the skin to be preserved. And in proof of that, we have from safety deposit a worm, just a common earthworm.
That's not even the body fossil of a worm. That's the infilled burrow of a ceruppulid worm preserved in the Glen Rose Formation. It's a common ichnum fossil in that formation. They're all over the place.
This earthworm,
it's not an earthworm, it's a polychaete trace fossil. Earthworms are in the annelid order Opisthophora in the class Clitellata, which, yes, is an amusing name. And polychaetes are in the class Polychaeta.
was found near the museum in our excavations in Cretaceous layering, the same layering in which this tract was excavated.
Well, the same formation that the slab for the track was taken from, because remember, it's a hoax.
Same layering in which the finger was excavated.
Now, see, that's another problem. We don't actually know that. It's claimed that the apparently anonymous woman who lent Carl this rock, that he later kept without her permission, found it in a gravel pit north of Glen Rose that is part of the Walnut Formation, which formed in the Albian stage of the early Cretaceous. But here's the thing about gravel pits. You can find all sorts of stuff in there.
I live by the quarry. We should hang out by the quarry and throw things down there.
There are no in situ photographs of this rock being found in the walls of the quarry, and there is no reason to think that that's where the rock that kinda looks like a finger came from. So even if this were a real human finger, which it's not, it still wouldn't help Ball's case of out-of-the-place fossils being a problem for evolution, because we have no way of knowing the place this specimen came from.
This is an earthworm. When I put water on the earthworm, even some of the pink pigmentation is still there.
Still not a worm. It's a burrow, and one that hasn't even been made by an earthworm.
The band, the ring, is still intact. I've had very fine biologists examine it. There's no question that it is an earthworm.
No, he's just lying, otherwise there would be a citation and we'd know who did this work and what their conclusions were. We don't have that. But what we do have is actual scientists describing infilled and preserved worm burrows in the Glen Rose Formation. And I love how he holds the thing up to the camera so that we can see the lack of any ring that would help show this to be an earthworm. But none of the other vertebrate fossils in the Glen Rose and Walnut Formations had any soft tissue preservation, never mind full soft tissue preservation. That on its own indicates that there is no plausible way for this rock, looking like a finger, to actually be a fossil from the Cretaceous.
Well, if the soft tissue of a worm can be preserved, there should be no problem in the same conditions preserving a finger.
True, it's just too bad that that's not what was preserved in that example. It's just an infilled burrow.
But leading evolutionary scholars have said, all right, you have footprints, those are somewhat subjective, even though man uniquely makes a footprint that is very distinctive.
No scientist has admitted that these are even plausibly human footprints, including pretty much every other creationist who isn't Kent Hovind.
What I believe is dumb.
You have a human finger, but...
Which again, no, he doesn't. I mean, that would be another option for showing humans at a time incompatible with evolutionary biology's conclusions about human evolution.
Show us an actual man-made artifact to show that we're talking about intelligent man. We're talking about a prototype. In our opinion, those long ages are not there at all.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
In our opinion, the world before the flood, in the equispheric balance, which we will discuss.
Equispheric balance is certainly a series of syllables allowed by English phonotactics. In case you're wondering, equispheric isn't a word, and equisphere isn't a word outside of a brand of metal alloy additive powder. The company that makes it was founded in Canada in 2015, so I'm pretty sure that that's not what Carl is talking about. I'm pretty sure he just made up a word on the spot that sounded fancy and just trusted that his audience is too dumb to notice. Once again, few people have more contempt for the intelligence of creationist laity than the professional creationists do.
Shortly, that world before the flood in its equispheric balance would have produced the optimal genetic expression of living forms.
The Enterprise computer system is controlled by 3 primary main processor cores, cross-linked with redundant Mellicort's Ramostat 14 kiloquad interface modules.
And thus, they were intelligent people.
I guess the way to get smart is to equispherize your genetic expression, and here I thought you had to secure your tremathem to prevent side fumbling in your boloid stators. Well, the more you know.
I brought from Safety Deposit the real artifact, a very special artifact.
I love how he says the real artifact because he knows how fake basically everything in his museum is. So he has to assure us that this is totally real, you guys. He's totally serial.
It is the London artifact. It's a hammer, a man-made artifact.
Yep, it sure is man-made. It's named after London, Texas, where it was found in 1936.
We're currently having
a Mitch McConnell-style blue screen?
And a string of...
wood from the handle, carbon dated to give us a relative dating technique.
No. Even if you think that carbon dating doesn't work or needs to be recalibrated, it's an absolute dating technique because it gives you an age in terms of a number of time units since the material in question was part of a living organism.
Originally, it was found by Frank and Emma Hahn, now deceased, as a concretion, completely encasing all of the artifact. They simply found in an area with adjacent material like it, they found a rock with a stick protruding from the rock.
Well, allegedly, just like with the finger from last time, we don't actually have any recorded provenance for this artifact, so who knows where it came from?
They took it home. Their son, who spent years as a professor at Ohio State University, chipped the top of it off and was amazed to find inside a man-made artifact.
It's always telling what Carl does and doesn't cite. He usually gives references for his various quote mines, which is nice because sometimes they're even from sources I can access. But for claims like this, it's just nothing but his own museum, which amounts to, trust me bro. Well, I don't trust Carl. He's shown himself to be very sketchy and probably very, very dumb.
Now, this is 6 1/4 inches in length. It's very sophisticated. It's octagonal in design, has an eye, even originally had a wedge inside the handle to keep it in place.
Interestingly, it's as sophisticated as a late 19th century mining hammer, because that's what this is. It's a mining hammer with a calcium concretion around it as a result of deposition from hard water.
Now, I took this hammer to Battelle Lab in Columbus, Ohio. That's the lab that analyzed the moonstones.
Okay, not sure why that detail matters.
Same lab, same technician, same instrument analyzed this as analyzed the original moonstones. We did a scanning electron microprobe elemental analysis and found that this artifact is 96.6% iron. That's very pure iron.
Relatively, but it's well within the manufacturing capabilities of the last couple centuries.
0.74% sulfur and 2.6% chlorine. That's mind-boggling.
My mind is currently unboggled. It had to be made of something. What makes this particular composition impossible or whatever?
Our best laboratories today, our finest minds, cannot compound iron with chlorine. Yet, we have iron compounded with chlorine with a minimal amount of sulfur.
Anyone can mix iron and chlorine. 2 iron atoms plus 3 diatomic chlorine gas molecules yields 2 iron 3 chloride molecules. And remember, this kind of testing doesn't tell you what molecules are present, just what elements. So this test can't distinguish between free chlorine and iron in some impossible alloy versus just some iron that had some chloride present. Basically, the only way for this to be impossible is for chlorine to just not exist. But, chlorine does exist.
Now that's amazing. Whoever made this had to be a master artisan.
By which I assume Carl means some guy in a hammer shop in the 1800s.
We do not know if this was deposited in the worldwide flood.
No, we know pretty conclusively that it was not, because there is no such evidence such a flood ever happened, and there are literal physical mountains of evidence showing it did not. Never mind the fact that every proposed model for Noah's flood that is currently in creationist circles produces so much heat that on the safe end, Earth is a ball of lava, and on the dangerous end, it's a ball of plasma rivaling the sun in both temperature and luminosity.
Or in the Peleg experience a few hundred years after the flood,
which never seems to be well described, even by creationists. It's almost like they don't know what to do with that obscure verse that in the days of Peleg the earth was divided. I tend to think it's a passing ideology of the split of the earth into different nations, but I also don't know with any high confidence if that's true.
We do not know when it was deposited.
I know when it was deposited, in the late 19th century, around when it was manufactured.
But we do know this. It was found and has been confirmed to have been within the same layer in which dinosaur footprints and dinosaur remains are found.
No, we don't know that, because it was just found by some guy. We don't actually have a site map. We don't have any documentation of the condition it was found in. There's no documentation of it in situ. It's literally just a hammer with some calcium and lime from hard water around it that was manufactured around a century and a half ago. Even if the guy who found the concretion the hammer was in found it on exposed Glen Rose Formation limestone, which is what Baugh is implying, that doesn't prove that that's where it originated. Because it could have been put there, it could have fallen there, it could have eroded out and come to rest there from a higher location. Everything we have points to this hammer being a mining hammer that ended up in hard water. We have literally no evidence pointing to it coming from Mesozoic rock.
Whenever this hammer was fabricated, dinosaurs were still around.
Only if by dinosaurs we're including birds, which sure were around in the 19th century. Unlike now, where all the birds are fake.
And as we learned a few moments ago, pterodactyl dinosaurs.
Pterodactyls aren't a real thing. It's pterosaurs, and they're not dinosaurs. You'd think that since Carl thinks he can overturn the vast majority of science, that he'd bother to get some things right. I guess that's a bridge too far.
Probably are still around.
Too bad those numerous expeditions that Carl and pals mounted found not a single shred of physical evidence of extant pterosaurs. And I mean that sincerely. Like, it would be super cool to find an extant pterosaur somewhere. It just hasn't happened, and I doubt that it will.
Here's a part of the overlay material. Inside, you'll see a groove of the hammer, and this was a part of the material over the top of the artifact.
Yep, when you split open a concretion, you get to parts. That is not really worth noting, since that's just how the world works, and how it's been known to work since the dawn of time.
Scholars came from global communities.
What does that mean? What scholars? What communities? Carl loves to use words like scholars and academics, and he seems to loathe ever, saying who or where their published findings are.
according to the Hans, and each would want a little fragment that they had chipped off the top of this marvelous artifact, and ultimately nothing was left but the large portion with a secondary portion.
Okay, so people took samples, and that's why the Counters lab isn't complete. That seems both plausible and entirely unnecessary to mention.
I'm trying to say that man and dinosaur did live contemporaneously.
I know, it's just that he's doing a really crap job of it.
According to the theory of evolution,
how much you want to bet that whatever he says next is actually not something predicted in evolutionary theory?
it took the granite 300 million years to crystallize.
Yep, evolutionary theory has absolutely nothing to say about granite, not even a little, but okay.
I want you to notice on this model done by world-famous artist Robert Summers, the granite as illustrated just below the surface on the planet, and this illustrates the original creation.
Okay, so this represents whatever crazy fever dream Carl had about what he thinks the Bible says the earth was like before the fall of man. What it doesn't represent is anything real, or with evidence for it. Got it.
And the granite, of course, underlies all the continents. Originally, it did underlie the sea basins as well. According to the theory of evolution, it took that granite.
Nope, evolution still doesn't have anything to say about granite because granite isn't alive, and the theory of evolution is a theory about the origin and patterns of biodiversity.
300 million years to crystallize.
Carl is off by a couple orders of magnitude. It usually takes millions, not tens or hundreds of millions of years, for a magma intrusion to cool into granite.
I have with me a piece of granite. Dr. Robert Gentry is a world-class scholar.
That's creationist for buffoon.
And Dr. Gentry has analyzed over 200,000 samples of granite worldwide.
Here come the polonium halos.
Some of these samples have been brought up from core drills deep in the crust of the earth. Some have been located on the surface of the earth as well. Now, inside this granite, you'll see little black flakes. These are normally called mica or biotite.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it. Get on with it.
This granite holds part of the answer to the question, how did we get here? You see, there are only two models. Leading evolutionary scholars have admitted the two models exhaust the possibilities. Either we were created by the direct fiat design of a personal creator, or we arrived by natural processes.
Or a creator directed natural processes by setting them up so as to reach his intended goals, or a creator used mostly natural means with the occasional supernatural intervention.
Dr. Robert Gentry, with a microscope, looked inside this black mica or biotite. He found tiny little rings called pleochroic halos from the energy radiation from radioactive materials. Now, the signature of these rings is very, very specific. And not only did he find the rings left by the decay of uranium, thorium, strontium, rubidium, potassium, argon, radioactive lead, Pb-207, etc., but he found the rings left by the radioactive decay of polonium. Polonium-218, 210, and 214. Now, remember, the evolutionary concept is that...
He means the scientific concept, or maybe the geological concept.
It took 300 million years for this granite to crystallize.
More like 3 million, but okay.
Yet at all depths, Dr. Gentry found in the granite these rings left by polonium. The half-life of polonium-218 is less than 3 minutes.
That's pretty short.
Scholars in this audience will recognize that after 7 half-lives of any radioactive material, all measurable amounts of that material have been exhausted. So you can only multiply by 7 for the outside possibility of time duration. He found polonium-218 halos. Now, the half-life is less than 3 minutes. That means that in order to record that polonium-218 had been in the granite at all. This granite had to be crystallized, functional, and recording in less than 3 minutes.
Well, no, less than 21 minutes according to Ball's own logic, but his own logic, I'm sure you'll be shocked to learn, fails. First, polonium isn't primordial, it's a decay product of uranium, and all that's needed for it to appear as a polonium halo without associated uranium halos is for the polonium to be able to migrate in the crystal, which can indeed happen. It's not a miracle, it's just normal uranium decay plus a bit of internal shuffling.
At the outside, 20 minutes, but it's better still. Dr. Gentry found at all levels in this mica biotite crystalline material inside the granite the rings left by polonium-214. The half-life of polonium-214 is 0.000164 seconds.
Wow.
164 microseconds. All 7 half-lives would be expended faster than I can snap my finger. That means that if you look at the data objectively, there's no possibility of long eons of time in the formation of the granite. It means this granite had to be functional and crystallized as a part of the design of the Creator in the original creation.
Okay, I can't express in words how much I hate polonium halos, because to me it's such a boring argument. Researching this makes me want to claw something to shreds. So let's get into this a bit more in depth, because apparently I'm a masochist. Polonium halos are interestingly only found, as Gentry describes them, in granite that did not cool directly from magma, but instead was formed in part through replacement of the original minerals, and interestingly, only in granites with uranium-238, and then only from polonium isotopes that are part of the uranium-238 decay chain. Which, you know, is a bit suspicious. What a halo is basically a debris field caused by the alpha decay of some nuclide. Now, each radioactive nuclide that decays by alpha decay releases alpha particles with a particular energy. Since the mean free path length, that is the average distance it can travel before interacting with the nucleus of an alpha particle, is determined by its energy, each nuclide produces halos of a certain distance in the form of a sphere of a radius equal to the mean free path of the emitted alpha particle. Now, you may have heard that uranium-238 decays into lead-206, but it doesn't do this directly. That's what the decay chain is. The original uranium will become thorium and polonium, among other elements. Importantly, one of these elements is radon. Specifically, we're interested in radon-222. Radon-222 has a half-life of 3.8 days, which isn't very long, but it has an important property. It's a noble gas. That means that it does not normally form chemical bonds, allowing it to easily move around in a crystal, especially if the crystal is still forming through the replacement of minerals, which is always the case in the granites Gentry has identified as having his polonium halos. When radon decays, it decays into polonium-218, and then along with other stops along the way to lead-208, it may become polonium-214 and polonium-210. These are the only polonium halo sources associated with the halos Gentry is talking about. Putting all this together, we can see what's actually happening, and it's not the instantaneous creation of granite.
Let's explore one other area before pausing briefly. Is there a possibility that living systems could have evolved?
They're doing it right now, so yes.
Dr. Robert Gange, with the Smirnoff Research Facility in Princeton, New Jersey, has taken the literature from microbiological laboratories and has found that evolution is absolutely impossible. And he illustrates it like this. Inside all material is information. For instance, inside the atom, even the hydrogen atom, there's an informational exchange between the electron, the proton, the neutron. There's an informational exchange.
I mean, there are interactions via virtual photons that communicate the electromagnetic force, which is what binds electrons to nuclei. You can call that information exchange if you want, but it's kind of a weird way to put it.
Dr. Gange takes the literature published by major scholars and major laboratories at major universities to show that you can take all of the natural information, the information in all of the natural inorganic materials of the entire planet Earth, and it comes out to be 160 bits of information.
What? That makes absolutely no sense at all. 160 bits is basically nothing. If this were true, you could know literally everything there is to know about Earth by looking at a string of ones and zeros 160 digits long. There are 1.46 times 10 to the 48th possible such combinations. I'll remind you that a deck of cards with 52 cards has 8.066 times 10 to the 67th possible ways to shuffle it, which means that according to Carl, the number of ways a deck of cards can be arranged is 10 quintillion times more than the number of ways all the individual fundamental particles of the entire Earth can be arranged. Maybe he means that any one fundamental particle can be successfully described in 160 bits, but that isn't true either. In fact, you can't fully describe a fundamental particle state in any number of bits because the state is fundamentally fuzzy. The more you know about certain aspects of a particle, like its momentum, the less well-defined other aspects, such as position, are.
Now, 160 bits of information is a lot of information. Actually, 270 bits of information would be the equivalent of 10 to the 80th power. So that's a lot of information.
It's really not much information, though. My videos are usually produced at 1920 by 1080. Each one is about 2.02 megabytes. That's a lot more than 160 bits. Most of my videos contain more than 50,000 such images. Before this sentence, my script contained 78,092 characters. If they were stored in the most compact way text is normally stored, in text files, ASCII, which they're not, they're stored in a less efficient way, that means my script would have 624,736 bits of information. 270 bits is basically nothing. That's fewer than 34 ASCII characters.
All of the information and all of the natural elements of planet Earth, put together, the inorganic elements, the entire globe, that information is 160 bits of information. Let's take the entire solar system, including the globe, our Earth, the Sun, 8 other planets, asteroids, debris, etc., and it comes out to 170 bits of information. Let's take the entire universe. It comes out to be 235 bits of information.
So that means that this sentence takes about 10 times more information to store on a computer in a text file than it takes to describe the entire universe. A universe which includes a file storing this sentence.
But now let's go to living material. Living material is another ball game entirely. Living material is extremely complicated. First of all, it's three-dimensional.
All bulk matter is three-dimensional because we live in a 3D world.
And then every single component is interdependent and codependent on every other component.
Not really. You can have a nucleus and not need mitochondria. Just ask Henneguia salminicola, a parasitic jellyfish relative that parasitizes several species of salmon and entirely lacks mitochondria.
The smallest unit of living information we know anything about is a protein molecule. One protein molecule holds 1,500 bits of information. Now, did you get that?
Yes, I did get that completely impossible statement, that proteins which are part of the universe have more information than the universe. The universe cannot take less information to describe completely than the information of anything in the universe. I don't care that it's stupid to assign these numbers because they don't mean anything. Let's just take them as is. What Baugh is saying is mathematically impossible. He's trying to tell me the circle has 5 corners.
The entire universe of non-living material.
Oh, it's just the non-living material.
holds 235 bits of information, but one single non-replicating unit of living material, one protein molecule, holds 1,500 bits of information.
Okay, so let's drill into this a bit. A protein is a molecule, a big complex one, but still a molecule. It is composed of amino acids, which themselves are molecules. One of the largest known proteins is Titan, which has 132,983 carbon atoms, 211,861 hydrogen atoms, 36,149 nitrogen atoms, 40,833 oxygen atoms, and 694 sulfur atoms. That's a total of 422,569 atoms. Now, there are 94 naturally occurring elements, which means that to use information to specify which element an atom belongs, you would need at least 8 bits. That means we are now at 3,380,522 bits just to record each item in a Titan protein. But they also have a special arrangement that needs to be recorded. In computing, such coordinates are usually done in 16 or 32-bit floating point decimals, using a 3-dimensional Cartesian coordinate system. I'll assume a 16-bit floating point system for recording the locations, even though really 32 or 64 might be more reasonable. This means that it now takes 10,141,656 bits to capture the location and type of atom of each component of one Titan molecule. That's about 1.27 megabytes. That's a lot compared to what Carl is telling us. But let's take a look at how much information it takes to describe a quarter liter of water. Well, under standard conditions, water is about a gram per milliliter. So let's assume that we have 250 grams of water. The molar mass of water is 18.01528 grams per mole. That means that we have 4,503.82 moles of water. If we multiply that by Avogadro's number, that is 6.023 times 10 to the 23rd, we find that we have 7.713 times 10 to the 27th molecules of water. Each has 3 atoms, so we have 8.138 times 10 to the 27th atoms. So from before, we know that we're using 24 bits to describe the type and location of each atom. So that means that a glass of water has 1.953 times 10 to the 29th bits of information, or 2.441 megabytes. And remember, this doesn't describe the energy levels, momentum, or anything else, just where each atom is and what it is. So a glass of water takes about twice as much information to record in our crude way as a Titan protein. Which means that just based on basic chemistry and some math, the non-living world would take vastly more information to completely describe than everything that's living, even if we restrict ourselves to only consider Earth. Now, you might argue that I'm defining information wrongly, and hey, maybe I am. If you think so, I invite you to give a definition that we can use to calculate with at least 3 significant figures exactly how much information is in any particular molecule or collection of molecules. Once you do that, we can figure out how to measure the information of the whole biosphere versus the whole rest of the Earth. It shouldn't actually be all that difficult, given that we have reasonable mass estimates for the biosphere and the Earth as a whole, and that we also have reasonable estimates for the elemental composition of Earth, meaning we can derive approximate numbers of atoms for both. If you're not actually willing to come up with a way to objectively quantify this information, but want to argue about it anyway, then shut the f*** up and go away. You're worthless, and so is your argument.
What's the difference between 235 bits of information and 1,500 bits of information? Light years between.
I mean, it's 1,250 bits, which isn't really light years, since light years don't really convert into bits. In fact, it's less information than is in this sentence at a minimum.
Now let's go to information that can produce a reproducing cell, a bacterium. A common bacterium is E. coli. E. coli is in the intestinal tract of every person watching this video at the moment. One single E. coli bacterium, just one, holds 7 million bits of information.
Now, I know that on screen he's been flashing up exponential bits, but that isn't a phrase that means anything, and so unless he tells me otherwise, I'm going with the assumption that when he says bit, he means bit, as in a place in a signal that can take one of 2 states. It's the most basic unit of information.
Now let's go to a human cell. One single human cell holds 20 billion bits of information. If the evolutionist wants his primordial soup pond with the right gases, energy system, and lightning strokes, give it to him. Give him an entire Earth as a primordial soup pond.
You gotta love those primordial soup ponds. I feel like we're building to a point that won't even be coherent.
Give him the entire universe. Fill the universe with electrons, and let the universe have his 15 billion years, 30 billion years. Give it an eternity of time. for each electron to writhe, cohort, and experiment with every other electron in the entire universe.
Hot electron on electron action. But also, don't you think Carl knows that electrons smashing into each other like blindfolded subs in a party scene isn't how chemistry works?
It is impossible for the entire universe, given an eternity of time, since it holds only 270 bits of information.
Which again is impossible since it can't hold less information than the sum of its parts, which would include all the living things. And of course, there's no conservation of information principle that's been proposed that prevents low information matter from producing higher information matter. And since we don't know how this information is being measured, we can't say a damn thing about what the universe could or could not produce on the basis of information content.
To produce a single protein molecule, let alone a reproducing bacterium, or ultimately a human cell.
Non sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.
Watch this and we'll break. A book has been written recently by a major scholar in Australia, Michael Denton. Evolution, Theory in Crisis.
By major scholar, Baugh means Discovery Institute fraud. That book was published in 1986, and you might have noticed that in the nearly 4 decades since, evolution seems to have not collapsed. It's almost like it was never a theory in crisis, something even acknowledged by young Earth creationist Todd Wood.
And Dr. Denton admitted, evolution just won't work. He's an evolutionist, but it just won't work.
If Michael Denton is an evolutionist, then I'm the goddamn tooth fairy.
He said, for instance, in the cell, the DNA provides the information for the protein synthesis apparatus. Yet, it's that protein synthesis apparatus that provides the very proteins for the DNA to exist.
Good thing RNA can self-assemble from nucleic acids and can synthesize proteins all on its lonesome then, huh?
That protein synthesis apparatus provides the protein phosphate compounds for the energy system, yet the energy system, of mitochondria, etc., provides the actual energy for the protein synthesis to function.
Good thing we know about things like non-living hypercycles that manage to have metabolisms without needing the complex protein and genetic materials present in even mitochondria.
That protein synthesis provides the proteins for the cell membrane, yet the membrane holds that entire synthesis apparatus intact.
Good thing the simplest membrane is a lipid bilayer that doesn't need proteins, which is how the metabolism of the previously mentioned hypercycles is contained.
In other words, everything is interdependent and codependent on everything else. Evolution just won't work.
Cool story, bro. That's the end of his first episode. But it's not the end of this episode. We're diving into the second episode. Why? I don't know. Maybe I just have low self-esteem and feel like I deserve to be tortured for your entertainment. Which means, hey, if you like listening to my voice as my brain matter slowly liquefies because of all this stupidity, maybe subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and check out my Patreon, or join the channel here on YouTube. There are links in the description.
From the very beginning of the creation, a marvelous design has been evident. All nature abounds with evidence of creation and a creator. Venture into this exciting realm with an open mind and a commitment to truth.
I love how Baugh, a notoriously dishonest man, is on a show asking us to have a commitment to truth.
Welcome back to segment 2 of Creation in Symphony.
I do not feel welcome. I also noticed that Carl is calling himself a PhD, but he has even less cause to use that as a label than does Kent Hovind, because at least Kent's fake degree is from a fake university that physically exists. Carl doesn't even have that. He has a fake degree from nowhere, not even a diploma mill, so that's fun.
In the last session, we learned that evolution just won't work, admitted by major scholars in major scientific fields of discipline.
That's a funny way to say, in the last session, I lied about scientists to pretend they don't think evolution works when they do, and lied about other scientists to pretend that they knew a single damn thing about biology or geology, when in fact, they were astrophysicists without a clue about either.
But will creation work? How did the dinosaurs fit into the creation model? If everything is recent, why don't we have dinosaurs around anymore?
I really do not understand the obsession with dinosaurs from young Earth creationists. It's like they think that the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous is some central dogma of evolutionary biology, and if anything indicated late surviving dinosaurs, it would collapse the whole edifice of biology. It really wouldn't. And they should realize that, given what happened with organisms like the coelacanth or the Wollemi pine, both were thought extinct since the Cretaceous, and when they were found alive, the response was, oh, I guess only most of them went extinct. That's neat.
Is there a worldwide flood experience recorded in the scientific data?
I feel like the word no doesn't even begin to cover the amount of negation that question requires. It's like I need a new grammatical category, like supernegation, for when you need to indicate that not only is a statement false, but it's so false that the opposite is true. Carl has not just put me at a loss for words, but a loss for grammar.
What research avenue will give us some conclusive answers to this?
Geology, and it has already given us answers. The problem for Ba here is that the answers are definitely not the ones he wants.
Well, let's now consider the creation model in detail. I'd like to present to you Creation in Symphony, the complete model.
All right, let's see it.
The creation model is stated like this initially: in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth.
Ah yes, a scientific model that starts out with just Genesis 1:1 being literally true as an axiom. That bodes well.
And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light that it was good.
Okay, we're not going to sit and just listen to Genesis 1. I'm sure that most of my audience is familiar with the text, and for those who are not, just Google Genesis chapter 1 and it'll pop up in like a million translations as well as the original Hebrew, as well as the antiquity translations of the Septuagint and the Peshitta, which are Greek and Aramaic respectively.
The creation model answers so many problems.
Okay, so that's good. That's what scientific models are supposed to do. The key thing a model in science does is allow us to make predictions that we could not make without it, as well as explain what might otherwise seem to be unrelated data points in terms of the framework of the model, so we can tease out causal relationships in the data. If creationism wants to be taken seriously as science, the bare minimum it needs is a model that explains all current data under its purview, at least as well as the scientific understanding, and also that makes better predictions about the future than current scientific models. If that's what Carl's got, then I might have to pivot my channel and rename it Truth Dino, or Christ Truth Ministries Dinosaur Division, or something like that. Put in the comments suggestions for what my new channel name should be when Carl shows his amazing creation model that returns me to the fold of young Earth creationism.
It begins like this: in the beginning, God. I will not in this lecture, nor any series of lectures or private conversation, attempt to define or prove the existence of God.
Well then, it's going to be really hard to take this model seriously when the first and most important thing is that it is neither defined nor argued to even be real. I'm starting to feel like I might not need any of those new channel names, but hey, it's early in the episode, so maybe I'll still be changing my mind.
As Wernher von Braun, one of the greatest scientists of this century, stated, why do we need a candle to light the influence of the sun? God needs no proof. In the beginning, God existed. He always has existed.
See, the difference is that it's hard for people to honestly disagree about the existence of the sun or that it produces strong light. People do seem to disagree about divinity, whether it exists at all and in what manner. In an area where people can disagree in good faith, you're going to have to argue for your position if you want people to take it seriously. The existence of God is one of those areas as far as I can tell.
If I or any other speaker or communicator or scholar could give you proof of God, that would essentially mean academically that we would have created God or held the capacity to create God.
Let's use this with another noun. If I or any other speaker could prove the existence of elephants, it would mean that we have the capacity to create elephants. I feel like I can show someone quite conclusively that elephants exist, by example, going to a zoo. But I am also pretty sure that I don't have it within my power to simply will elephants into existence. This makes no sense whatsoever and sounds like simple special pleading to get out of having to make an argument for the existence of God, which to me says more about the intellectual shortcomings of Baugh's approach to the question of the existence of God than it does anything about God himself.
We cannot create God. He created us. Therefore, I do not suggest a proof for God. I simply expose evidences that He does exist.
Okay, so now we're not using proof in the colloquial sense, as I had rather assumed, but we mean it in the more formal logical sense, and so we recognize that evidence pointing to a conclusion, but not formally proving it, is still something to recognize. Which, hey, that's great, I agree. But then, what was the whole point of Carl saying that he wasn't going to argue for the existence of God? Pointing to things he thinks makes God existence more likely is exactly arguing for the existence of God. See what I mean? This guy rambles and contradicts worse than a large language model AI chatbot.
In fact, I'd like to give you the statements of some of the leading scholars of the world in various areas of scientific discipline.
Nope, Carl spent almost the whole of episode 1 just quote mining. I'm not doing it again. We'll cut back in after he's done attempting to slander scientists. I don't care about that. I care about data. Something that some scientists said outside of his field isn't important.
We can observe the universe and find various factors in existence. For instance, there's limitless space.
That is not something we know with any confidence. At most, we can say that there's so much space that we could never reach the end of it, should there be such a thing.
Unending time.
That's also not clear, as it seems that the arrow of time gets its directionality from proximity to an extreme period of low entropy, and that perhaps with a high entropy universe, time would not be so directional. Of course, this also gets into things like the A and B theories of time. Time very well may have an end, we just don't know, and we don't even know if that would mean anything.
Perpetual motion.
You'd think that as someone who makes such a big deal out of the second law of thermodynamics, Carl wouldn't then go on to say that perpetual motion exists. But hey, if he actually knew what he was talking about, it would be hard for him to be a young Earth creationist.
Unbounded variety. Infinite complexity.
I'm not even sure what that's supposed to mean. The world isn't made of actual mathematical fractals. So I'm going to go ahead and say that unless these terms are way better defined than this is either false or nonsense.
Look further and you'll find consciousness, feeling, will. You'll observe ethical values, religious values, beauty, justice, love, and life. No one could deny these entities exist.
I'm not aware that anyone is. I'm really hoping that this doesn't turn into a discussion about the problem of consciousness. I don't have a solution for it, and the fact that there is a mystery out there doesn't negate what else we know about things that are not so mysterious.
As Dr. Henry Morris pointed out, the first cause of limitless space has to be infinite in extent.
Why? What indicates this? A single spark can cause a huge explosion. The assassination of one archduke can cause most of the world to end up in a war over nothing that matters to most participants. Small things can cause big effects. Why is it different for the origin of the universe? Is it because if the universe is special, then it means that Carl's prior conclusions are true? You know, could it be post hoc nonsense?
Is such a thing even possible? Yes, it is.
The first cause of unending time must be eternal in duration.
Same problem as before. This needs to be argued for, not just asserted.
The first cause of perpetual motion must be omnipotent in power.
That one I might actually be willing to accept, since if it existed, perpetual motion would be a miracle. If we found something so obviously impossible, then a miracle would actually be a pretty plausible explanation to me.
The first cause of unbounded variety must be omnipresent in phenomena.
It just occurred to me that I could set up a frequency harmonic between the deflector and the shield grid using the warp field generator as a power flow anti-attenuator, and that, of course, naturally created an amplification of the inherent energy output.
See that?
The first cause of infinite complexity must be omniscient in intelligence.
Really? Well, I'm not omniscient, so let's see if I can create infinite complexity. Okay, so take the complex number plane, and on it, plot those values which we will call c, where the function of c in respect to the number z equals z squared plus c, and where the value of c is then recursively changed to the new value onto infinity. And z starts at 0. Those values for c, where the values of z is unbounded, will be in the set to be plotted, and those where the value of c is unbounded will be outside of the set to be plotted. Oh no! Look, I just made the Mandelbrot set, which is famously infinitely complex. And I didn't actually have to be omniscient to do it. That was an easy one.
The first cause of consciousness must be personal.
Why? We're just back to statements that I can see no reason must be necessarily true. Maybe it's true, but if it is, I'd need an actual reason to think so.
The first cause of feeling must be emotional. The first cause of will must be volitional. The first cause of ethical values must be moral. The first cause of religious values must be spiritual. The first cause of beauty must be aesthetic. The first cause of justice must be just. The first cause of love must be loving. The first cause of life must be living.
My only response to this is just one big old citation needed.
My friend, I submit to you that the first cause of the universe, the designer of the entire universe.
The first cause does not need to be a designer. Perhaps the first cause is Azathoth, the idiot god who mindlessly dreamed our reality into existence, and whose waking will cause our reality to cease existing like a candle flame being snuffed out, which is why we must ensure that the piping of the outer gods which keeps him lulled to sleep endures. For this reason, the crawling chaos is sent out to the various worlds to ensure that the will of his masters such as Yog-Sothoth, the gate and the key, is done, and that Azathoth, the demon sultan, never wakes.
The designer of the entire universe is the God of the Bible. There is no other plausible candidate.
Sure there is. Maybe it's Brahma. Maybe it's Ptah. Maybe it's Hori Nodens.
The God of the Bible is the God of creation.
Maybe, but in order to argue for that, one would have to do more than just make a bunch of unsubstantiated claims about causality.
We have produced a chart under our auspices, gleaning from background physical concepts of the evolutionary model on the bottom.
Work has been proceeding on the crudely conceived idea of an instrument that would not only provide inverse reactive current for use in unilateral phase detractors, but would also be capable of automatically synchronizing cardinal gram meters.
Big Bang theory or steady state theory all involve various areas of expression. And we have seen in the last lecture that that just won't work.
I feel like Carl and I watched entirely different episodes.
Now let's see if creation will work. In the beginning, God.
A phrase that explains more or less nothing. What about the existence of God and his creation of the universe lets you predict future data? Beyond perhaps just that one ought to be able to predict future data at all, which is a philosophical rather than a strictly scientific question.
The God of the Bible is a God consistent with the universe that he designed. For instance, in the universe you find triplets. In human expression you find a response to triplets.
God is dunking on the Doublemint twins by going for triplets.
In the Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln used triplets, and that's one of the reasons it's permanently etched in the minds and attention of men worldwide through the centuries. Triplets in the Bible, triplets in the universe are observed. For instance, you'll find energy, motion, and phenomena.
Naming three random things doesn't make them a special set of three. Let's add matter, space, and time. Oh look, now it's a hextuplet. We can add quantum fields and now it's a who knows how many tuplet. But even if we had found a real set of three, so what? That some things exist in a natural set of three isn't exactly evidence for the Trinity, since we know that's what he's getting at. You would have to show some good reason why the only way we'd expect such a set of three to exist is if a triune God made them. I feel like we're going to skip that part of the argument.
You'll find time as past, present, and future. You'll find that the biblical concept of God and the logical concept of God is not 1 + 1 + 1, but instead it's 3 in 1, 1 × 1 × 1.
I don't care. This isn't an ecumenical council. I'm not going to promulgate a new or updated creed.
But this earth was created as a sphere of water on day number 1.
Well, that sure is not in the text. That conclusion requires a lot of eisegesis. The Earth is depicted in Genesis 1:1 as already existing before God does anything, and under a cosmic chaotic ocean, hence the formless and void Earth, which can also be translated as formless and dark. God is hovering over the cosmic ocean, and goes about the business of forming the dry land by putting a dome over the Earth, which is flat, by the way, and thus separating the waters below the heavens from those above, still in the cosmic ocean. In fact, the traditional rendering of "in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth" is inaccurate and is better translated as "when God began to create the heavens and the earth." The only way to get God creating the earth as a sphere of water is because you need to move away from the clear literal meaning of the text Because modern science has shown that the interpretation is false. Because modern science has shown that that interpretation is false. But that's the thing, once you start reinterpreting the Bible so that it isn't scientifically false, you can just keep doing that until you get to an understanding that doesn't contradict science. Sure, it probably won't be the meaning the author had in mind as he wrote the verses in question, but then he also certainly didn't have in mind the Trinity, and yet Carl reads that into Genesis. So I guess Carl doesn't care about authorial intent in terms of the Bible.
Some activities were manifest of God on day number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then on day number 7, God rested. Not because he was tired, but God rested because he was finished.
And here I would have said that it was an etiology for the 7-day week, with a day of rest. With this story, people can point to God who rested and follow that example. The Sabbath is supposed to be to benefit humans, so let that be the reason that the narrative has God resting. He doesn't need a reason beyond to set an example.
Each day is a literal solar day. More about that in a moment.
You can't have literal solar days until the sun exists, and that doesn't happen until day 2. So at least the first day is logically precluded from being a solar day, because there's no way for the sun to return to its zenith on the next day if there's no sun. And that's what a solar day is. It's the time period between zeniths or nadirs of the sun in the sky. And yes, that means that strictly speaking, the length of a solar day does vary throughout the year. But for ease, modern people have averaged out the length so that the length of each calendar day, which is based on solar days, doesn't vary. The variance is so small and resets itself annually that you, as a human, probably can't notice that some of our days are a few seconds too long or too short.
There was a time when I believed that these were eons of time, even in the biblical, Christian mosaic of creation.
Oh, so Carl used to be less wrong. Boy, has his life been on the wrong trajectory for a long time now.
But academically, it's impossible for these to be eons of time.
He uses the word academically a lot.
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
These have to be literal time dimension expressions.
Now basically, the only new principle involved is that instead of power being generated by the relative motion of conductors and fluxes, it's produced by the modial interaction of magnetoreluctance and capacitive diractance.
For instance, the Earth has a magnetic field.
That's true.
That magnetic field is losing its energy exponentially.
No.
In fact, while the strength of the magnetic field has been declining for a bit over a century, we have a whole field called paleomagnetism. It uses things like residual magnetism in iron-heavy rocks to infer the strength and direction of the magnetic field in the past. And what it shows is that both the strength and the direction of the magnetic field of Earth changes, but that the field strength does not and has not simply decayed over time. Carl is doing exactly what he wrongly complains about scientists doing, using present rates as if they applied uniformly in the past, when we know they did not. On the other hand, he'll complain that we don't know that the rate of radiometric decay was the same in the past, even though changing it would require changes to fundamental laws of physics, unlike the field strength of the geomagnetic field. This whole thing is hypocrisy at its finest.
In 1835, Karl Gauss of Germany, for the first time in history, measured the Earth's geomagnetic field. In 1839, he began to measure it regularly, measured it the rest of his life. After his life, others took up the task, and we have 140 years of data in the U.S. Publishing Office, Washington, D.C., giving the actual calculations, historical calculations, of the strength or moment of the Earth's magnetic field, geomagnetic field.
Now this is true, and I'll bet Carl will go on to tell that during that minuscule time in either his so-called model or in reality, that there has been roughly a geometric decay in the geomagnetic moment. Of course, he probably won't tell you that we can measure that moment for times long before that, and that there's no indication that this decay has been ubiquitous in the past.
Now, Dr. Thomas Barnes, who at that time was head of the physics department, University of Texas at El Paso, took these data and put them in the computer, and he found that not only is the magnetic field of the Earth losing its intensity and extending its lines because it's limber, it's more loose.
Okay, Carl, keep it in your pants. The geomagnetic field isn't interested no matter how limber and flexible you think it is.
It has lost its energy. Others had certainly observed that we were losing the energy. But Dr. Barnes put these data in the computer, and he found that we're losing this energy exponentially. Now that's extremely significant.
Only if we actually know that we can extend this trend indefinitely into the past, and we know the opposite. Oh, and what Carl isn't saying outright, but is putting on screen, is that this Thomas Barnes is and was actually a young Earth creationist who was looking for reasons to pretend that the Earth is young. This wasn't just some look at the data and see where they lead scenario. This was a bad faith investigation with a determined outcome in mind from the outset. This is the opposite of how science is supposed to work. And while science, being a human endeavor, is not free from the flaws and foibles of a fallible humanity, scientists at least try to be as unbiased as possible, and they submit their work to review by those who do not share their biases to make their work as unbiased as possible. Creationists, though, just hide in their echo chambers with their fake peer review in their science cosplay journals.
That gave him a handle on how strong the field was in the past.
Well, the past century and a half or so, not just the whole past.
Now, the strength of that field in the past, every 700 to 1400 years, doubles according to these calculations.
Right, according to these calculations, we know for a fact are invalid if extended indefinitely. So here the creationists are ironically being the inappropriately uniformitarian ones.
And with an exponential decay. That means that if you double it every few hundred years, if you go back as far as 10,000 years ago, doubling it every few hundred years, the intensity of the Earth's magnetic field would have been so powerful that enzymes necessary for life processes and enzymes inside the functioning cell could not have held together due to the intensity of that energy. If you go back as far as 15 to 20,000 years ago, the energy of the Earth's geomagnetic field would have approximated that of a magnetic star, and many of the atoms in planet Earth could not have held together. I'm simply saying to you in the audience that the Earth is young.
Well, I'm saying to you that it's impossible for elephants to exist, because according to science, at birth they are about a meter tall and grow about 35% by the time they're 1 year old. Now, science also tells us that by about 15 years old, an elephant is full grown. But at 35% per year, that growth would make elephants over 90 meters tall. That's almost as tall as Godzilla in Godzilla vs. Destroya. Clearly, that can't work. So I guess elephants are made up. Or maybe we can't just extrapolate a 35% increase in height in a short span of time to just be an indefinite growth rate. Even just on its own merits, this doesn't make sense. Earth couldn't have a magnetic field as strong as that of a magnetar, because then it would have to be a collapsed star to even form the kind of matter that could support that kind of thing. So clearly, even Carl should understand that this can't be how the magnetic field works. There is a maximum moment the field couldn't exceed, which means that even if we didn't have paleomagnetic studies, we would know for sure that this extrapolation can't work indefinitely.
The entire system is young. And further in this lecture, we'll talk about the orchestrated design of that entire creation. In the beginning, God created the heaven, that's the space-time dimension, and the earth. And the earth was without form and void. It was a sphere of water.
I've already covered that, but Genesis says no such thing.
And God said, "Let there be light." Is that consistent with scientific research?
No, nothing in science indicates that light can be produced via the method of incantations.
Leading physicists have admitted that in the beginning there was light, and that light possessed the radiant energy to be transformed into atoms and suns and stars, and ultimately into life processes itself. It all began as light.
Right, which isn't speech. Like, I don't know why this isn't obvious as a problem. But also, it was energy broadly, probably in the form of electromagnetic radiation, which isn't exactly synonymous with light, but I'm willing to be charitable on that.
If God created the space-time dimension, and then planet Earth as a sphere of water, how is that consistent with bringing forth light?
I mean, God's omnipotent, he can do whatever, so it doesn't much matter. But I am wondering what predictions we can make about future data on the basis of this non-biblical idea.
Recently, Scientific American, February 1995.
So not an actual scientific source. Weird that Bach couldn't cite a real source, but okay.
issued an article of major import. Scholars at UCLA found a very special phenomena or phenomenon expressed in various phenomena, plural. They found that when water, pure water, has a vibratory encapsulation of a space.
The original machine had a base plate of prefamulated amulite surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing in such a way that the two spurving bearings were in a direct line with a panometric fam.
What he means is when it vibrates really strongly in a small region. We're about to talk about sonoluminescence. I can tell because my dino sense is tingling. It's like Spidey sense, but instead of warning me about danger, it warns me about really dumb pseudoscience.
We would call that a bubble. That the vibratory expression, sound, causes that bubble to collapse to the point where it reaches 100,000 degrees Fahrenheit in temperature and actually burst forth as light.
The bubble doesn't burst forth as light. The high temperature results in incandescence, just like it would in anything else of that temperature.
They call this sonoluminescence.
Called it.
They've actually recorded the entire spectra of this light. Here we have the time expression. Here we have the bubble radius expression in microns. We have the height of the bubble, the collapse of the bubble, and then we have its ultimate total collapse. We have the sine wave or sound wave, which is in a sine wave expression. The sound wave is simply the entrance of sound introduced through a recorder for them, and then the actual light expressed in the laboratory at UCLA and reported in Scientific American February 1995.
Okay, so let's just read Genesis 1 through 5, which is the relevant part here. I'm going with the NIV, as I know that's a popular translation with non-KJV only evangelicals.
In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day.
So from that, Carl got this.
In the beginning God created the space-time dimension and a ball of water. He shouted into the water really loudly to get it to light up. Then he separated his deafening shouts from the not shouting, and called the shouting day, and the not shouting he called night. And there was a solar day without the sun, but with a lot of shouting, presumably for like 12 hours at least. And there was evening and there was morning.
You'll find the long wave expressed, the visible expression, visible light. Most of the light was in the ultraviolet shortwave range with a tremendous amount of power.
What does that mean, a tremendous amount of power? The amount of energy per unit time was really high? How high? Compared to what? Could I use it to power my toaster? Could I use it to power my computer? Could we power a Bitcoin farm in Singapore for 3 seconds? Probably not that last one. That's an ungodly amount of power. And we know God would never do anything ungodly.
Once again, I want you to see an actual bubble of light generated just by sound. I'm saying that this step in the creation model is very plausible.
That if God shouted loud enough and for long enough he could make tiny bubbles of light appear in water isn't exactly the slam dunk for Genesis that I was hoping for. You know, we need some evidence that this is actually what happened. Do we have any? Nope. In fact, I'm not even sure what that would look like. And who cares if it's physically possible for loud shouting to make light? God's doing an explicit miracle here, which means that scientific plausibility is already right out the window. God doesn't need to have a body that he could use to make this sound in the first place, according to most Christian theology. And even if you go with a pre-incarnate but physically human Jesus that did it, then he couldn't do it with his human body in a scientifically plausible way, because human bodies can't be loud enough to light up an Earth-sized sphere of water with their voices.
Scientifically plausible. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, originally as a sphere of water on day number 1, and God said, "Let there be light." He had his own energy of sound, capability of creation, and a source of water from which to create the light, if that was his design.
Pretty big if, especially since none of this is actually in the text of Genesis 1.
I'm not saying that God the Creator in the person of Jesus Christ, used the water of the earth from which to create the light, but I'm saying that scientifically that has been found plausible.
That's some big Giorgio Tsoukalos energy right there.
And the next statement of the creation model is, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. We have illustrated this first on day number 1. There was simply a sphere of water.
Do you think Carl even noticed that he never finished his "we have illustrated this" sentence and just broke into a new sentence? I'm guessing not.
And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Water is a very unique compound. Hydrogen and oxygen. H2O, 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen.
I'm glad Carl doesn't reject all of science.
It has very unique characteristics. It's dipole. It has its own little magnetic field.
That's not that special. It just means water is polar, but so are ethanol, ammonia, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and hydrogen fluoride. It's not a really terribly unusual property for a compound to have.
It has its orientation north and south, or negative and positive. It is a molecular combination which actually in physics means that the 2 elements, hydrogen and oxygen, could be transmuted ultimately to provide all of the elements we find in the entire spectrum of elements here and throughout the universe.
What the f does that even mean? Hydrogen and oxygen can undergo fusion in a star, but Carl sounds like he's talking about alchemy. Also, pretty much any atom can undergo fusion in the right conditions, so this doesn't make water special. I can't tell if Carl even knows what he's talking about at this point.
Water with hydrogen can transmute the early elements. Oxygen can be transmuted to the higher elements. There's a barrier between 7 and 8 in physics. You scholars will understand what I'm talking about.
No, they really won't. Just normal stars can fuse atoms up to iron with no problem. That's atomic number 26, and they can do it starting with a fuel source of basically pure hydrogen. There's no magic barrier, and I think by saying "you scholars," he's trying to assure his mostly scientifically illiterate audience that even though what he's saying seems to make no sense, that the smart people will understand, so they don't need to worry their silly little heads about it. And of course, what he's saying makes no sense whether you're a scholar or not.
But in the creation model, that's already solved by the creation of oxygen along with hydrogen on day number 1.
What's the problem that needs solving? What the actual f is he even talking about?
Water has a unique characteristic in that it operates in a random order.
I have no words.
The molecules operate each independently. They don't line up.
Yes, they absolutely do. It's called hydrogen bonding, and the fact that water molecules have their own tiny dipole moment should be enough for Bob to figure that out. Further, they crystallize when frozen, unless they freeze too fast, which results in amorphous ice. Side note, you can get amorphous ice by freezing water in liquid nitrogen, and it's the best way to freeze popsicles. Now you know. Anyway, water is no more chaotic than ethanol or liquid methane at the molecular level, and it forms more structures than nonpolar liquids such as oil.
But again, back to the creation model. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Anytime the Spirit of God moves upon anyone or anything, He aligns the object upon which, or the person over whom, He is moving.
The lineup consisted simply of 6 hydrocoptic marsal veins, so fitted to the ambifacient lunar wane shaft that side fumbling was effectively prevented.
What does that even mean? Aligns how? Aligns to what? Who knows? It's just something Baum made up. Probably because he's going to go with the Russell Humphreys insanity about the Earth's magnetic field starting because of magically aligned water molecules, which were then magically transmuted into things besides water, like silicon, carbon, and iron, which I guess would explain why Carl is talking about transmuting water, but since it's God doing it, he doesn't have to care if water is transmutable naturally, which it's not. God can do whatever.
If it's an object of water, a sphere of water, the alignment does something very special. I already mentioned that water is dipole, that is positive and negative. It has its own little magnetic field or electromagnetic field. if you add energy sufficient to align the entire sphere,
then the sphere will just heat up, because that's what happens when you add energy to water.
Of water, then the entire mass takes upon itself an electromagnetic field.
Yep, the reference is to Russell Humphreys. I guess that's a confirmed prediction. I honestly didn't expect to be talking about that guy again so soon. Oh well.
Consistent with the strength of the total amount of fields in the water. Did you get that?
Yes, despite Ball's attempts to make it incomprehensible, the starting magnetic field, as imagined by Humphreys, is proportionate to the mass of the water, given that each water molecule has a set dipole moment which can be added together. Of course, what Carl isn't bothering to say is that it's also proportional to a variable in Humphreys' work that he called k, and which can vary anywhere from 0 to 1, meaning that Humphreys' math can be used to explain a starting magnetic field and subsequent decay that has no lower bound for the system, meaning that it's basically useless, so long as you can massage the math so that k is 1 or less. Then you can pretend that your initial field strength was predicted by Humphreys. It's like if I went around telling people that I know how much money is in their checking account, and when they scoff at me, I just tell them that the amount is somewhere between 0 and $10 trillion. Yeah, I'm probably right, but it's not exactly a confirmed prediction now, is it?
Simply by aligning the water, the Spirit of God would have automatically generated a magnetic field around that sphere of water. That magnetic field is extremely important.
Well, the Earth's real magnetic field is extremely important, but this made-up magical field isn't. I'll also note that Humphreys' model had no real explanation for geomagnetic pole reversals, which we know happen, but which can't really happen with his field, since the only thing the field can do is decay exponentially. It can't strengthen or change direction. It's almost like this ad hoc hypothesis that has no lower bound to its predictions still manages to be inadequate to explain the data we have about Earth's magnetic field.
The Earth's geomagnetic field is actually essential for life processes.
If by life process we mean not always having cancer all the time, or just straight up being cooked by cosmic rays, then yes.
What I'm suggesting to you is that in his marvelous design, the creator of the universe had the answer before we had the problem.
Okay.
An outstanding Russian scholar and an American scholar, Robert O. Becker, Nobel candidate.
I guess the Russian doesn't get a name. What, no names for commies or something?
Have collectively provided some impeccable data to show that all biological systems function.
Oh cool, a book from 1978 that I can't seem to get for less than $75. Also, A.P. Dubrov, the author, is most famous for his work on parapsychology, psychic phenomena, psychoenergetics, psychokinesis, human-plant telepathy, and acupuncture. You'll forgive me if I neither plan to buy a $75 book to complete this video, nor take seriously the claims of some Soviet kook who talked to plants and tried to move things with his mind. This isn't Stranger Things, even if I am a ghost.
On the energy of the Earth's magnetic field, electromagnetic field, geomagnetic field.
I don't doubt that many organisms use a geomagnetic field for various things, such as navigation. But so what? No one's trying to say that the Earth lacks such a field. So even if I were to take Carl's parapsychologist seriously, what does that have to do with creationism? Just because Carl proposed an origin for the magnetic field of the Earth that doesn't actually work, doesn't make anything to do with said field evidence for his other nonsense.
The cellular information, the exchange of information on the cellular level, is both chemical and electromagnetic. One reason today we have a decay in episodes of life.
You know, I used to say that Carl would fail a Turing test if you couldn't see him. I'm now pretty confident that even if you could see him, you'd be more likely to conclude that he is not a human than that he is, based on this gibberish. I hope whichever group of transdimensional beings that grew him and gave him such a faulty speech center feel bad now.
And function of life is that we are losing the strength in that magnetic field. Watch very closely. Without that field in sufficient strength, we don't have sufficient chemical and electromagnetic communication on a cellular level.
Ah, so your cells can't function outside of Earth's magnetic field. I guess that's why there were no survivors from any of the Apollo missions to the moon, right? Oh. Wait. But again, even if Carl were right, what does it matter?
A high school student a junior high school student, suggested to NASA that they do a very important experiment. He suggested 64 fertilized hen eggs, just chicken eggs. And he suggested that he keep 32 of those in a control.
I just want to point out that the citation for this is, do embryos need gravity? So this has nothing to do with the geomagnetic field.
And send 32 of those out into space on the shuttle. He suggested that 2 eggs on Earth and 2 eggs sent out with a shuttle be fertilized just a couple of days. And incrementally, the rest of the eggs in pairs would be fertilized various numbers of days.
Does Carl know that you can't really fertilize a chicken egg after it's been laid?
They did that. They had the 32 on Earth in a control chamber. They had the 32 sent out into space above the influence of the surface geomagnetic field. That's extremely important.
No, it's not, because the geomagnetic field extends far above the surface. That's why aurorae are a thing, and that's why the Van Allen radiation belts start at 1,000 to 6,000 kilometers from the surface of the Earth. The shuttle never went farther than low Earth orbit, which is about 2,000 kilometers or lower, so the eggs were never outside the Earth's magnetic field, which according to Baugh's own source wasn't the point anyway. The point was gravity, and by being in orbit, the eggs were in microgravity. Further, you don't need to go to space to get a chicken egg out of the magnetic field of the Earth. Just put the damn thing in a Faraday cage right here on Earth. That's way cheaper. A chicken egg is about 1.75 ounces in weight. That means that the shuttle carried about 3.5 pounds of egg to orbit, ignoring the incubation chamber and any restraints that would be needed. NASA estimated that each pound sent to orbit cost about 30 grand US. That means that this experiment cost $105,000 minimum. Amazon sells Faraday cage options that would do the same job for like $100 or less. But sure, no one at NASA thought that maybe they could do the same experiment for 1,000 times less money, and that it would actually work, since sending eggs into low Earth orbit doesn't remove them from the magnetic field. Or, of course, as the source actually says, this was always about gravity, which you can't do for $100. How am I supposed to not think that Carl knows better and is lying when even the name of his source contradicts him? If you're a creationist and you think Carl is anything but a lying sack of shit, please explain how to me in the comments.
Above the influence, direct influence of gravity, but more importantly, above the surface influence of the Earth's magnetic field. When they brought them back, all eggs that were in the control chamber on planet Earth hatched. All eggs that were sent out into space hatched, except the 2 eggs that had only been fertilized, had only been laid 2 days.
I guess embryos do need gravity, probably to establish the oral-aboral or posterior rostral axis. That doesn't seem too surprising. Too bad Carl is lying about what this experiment is about, and in support of a claim that, even if it were true, wouldn't do anything to show that creationism is true.
They'd only had 2 days of Earth's magnetic field influence in mitosis. The others had a number of days later, 4, 8, 16, etc., all the way up to incubation time.
No.
In fact, they were always exposed to Earth's magnetic field the whole time. But also, if they hatched, that means they were incubated, and since birds are spectacularly bad at being in zero-G, I'm going to say that incubation was done by an electrical incubator. That means that just to keep the bird eggs alive, they were exposed to electromagnetism, just from the incubators, since anytime electrical current flows, it creates a magnetic field.
Now, that means that mitosis, in division of the cell, to function properly, requires the Earth's magnetic field.
Nope, even if the chicken eggs had not been removed from Earth's magnetic field, which they were not, mitosis isn't something that only happens in the first couple days after fertilization. Mitosis happens for your whole life. If the magnetic field were vital for mitosis and this experiment actually removed the eggs from that magnetic field, then none of the eggs except perhaps the oldest would have hatched, and even then, the ones that hatched should be underweight. And of course, as I've noted, all that's needed for this experiment to be done on Earth is a relatively cheap Faraday cage. Bach could actually isolate chicken embryos from geomagnetism with a simple cage of copper wire. Isn't it curious that he doesn't?
On day number 1, as the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, that magnetic field was formed.
Talk about reading things into the text that are nowhere to be found in it.
That also provided a basis for day number 3. This day is one of my most intriguing areas of research.
And here I thought it was his research into obviously fake footprints.
Back to the creation model. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, space-time dimension, and the earth as a sphere of water. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. The light He called day, and the darkness He called night. That means this sphere of water was in motion with a regular rotation.
Non sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.
What about God shouting at the water so loud that it lit up, which, by the way, would prevent the creation of a significant net magnetic field, means that the water had to be spinning? Is it nothing? Because I think it's nothing.
Verse number 6 of Genesis chapter 1 states, "And God said, let there be a firmament." We've expressed this firmament with this model done by the world-famous artist Robert Summers. And this firmament is expressed as a bubble of water over the surface of the earth.
Do you think Carl knows that you can't actually build a hollow shell around a planet and then just suspend it there? Further, even if you somehow could, each water molecule would have to be in an orbit. But since all of these orbits would have to intersect each other around the equator, since all orbits cross the equator on Earth, that means that the water would be self-interacting and heating up, so it would quickly become a hydrogen-oxygen plasma. Man, creationists sure do love just ignoring thermodynamics when it's inconvenient for them, but then harping on it when it doesn't matter at all to the topic at hand, like biological evolution being possible.
Remember that at the time this firmament was built, on day number 2, we did not have the continents yet, we did not have the dry land, all of that's day number 3. But let's get to day number 2. We have illustrated this in vivid detail. Now the word for that firmament is rakia in the Hebrew. It's a very special word.
I'm sorry, hold up. But that poster is labeled superconductive metallic hydrogen in the firmament. I hope you all have some serious facepalm protection. You might want to pause now and go get an extra desk pillow for head desk protection too.
The word for firmament means to compress, pound together, and stretch out this arch of heaven in thin metal sheets. Metal sheets?
Well, the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament says that it means beaten metal plate or bow, firmament, the firm vault of heaven. It also says that the rakia was understood to be the gigantic heavenly dome, which was the source of light that brooded over the heavenly ocean, and of which the dome arched above the earth. So Carl isn't really wrong about what it means, but I do want to point out that if it's made of water, which isn't metal, then it's not made of metal.
That threw us. That threw scholars worldwide.
Too bad it wasn't off a cliff.
Researcher Dan Cook called and said, "I understand you're doing research on the world before Noah's flood." I said, "That's correct." He said, "I've spent over 20 years in major laboratories preoccupied with the question about the world before Noah's flood." And he said, after years and decades of research, he said, "I know what metal was in that firmament."
Brace yourselves.
And I said by long-distance telephone, "Dan, now wait a minute, was there real metal in that firmament?" And he said, "That's what the Hebrew word means." And I said, "I understand that. It is rakia. It means to compress, pound together, and stretch out this arc of heaven, or arch of heaven, in thin metal sheets." But I said, that I've taken to be figurative. He said, "It won't work figuratively."
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it. Get on with it.
He said, unless it's literal, you can't keep it in suspension.
No, even if it's literal, you can't suspend a metal dome over the Earth. Not all parts of it will be able to maintain orbital velocity at the same time, and it will simply collapse. There is no way to make this work other than miracles, at which point, who cares about the physical properties of the dome? Or making this scientific for that matter?
Won't work, figuratively. I said, all right, I'm listening. I said, no, wait a minute, you got a problem.
You have a problem. You're gonna die.
Because on day number 4, the light of day 1 was coalesced into star bodies, the sun, the moon, the greater light ruling the day and the lesser light ruling the night, and the influence of the stars.
I'm very curious how God shouting at the water caused the light in the water that was Earth to make stars. I guess there was a lot more water than I thought.
We're all felt, and the biblical record states that God set those stars, and you could see them more brightly and more vividly and in better color than we can today. If you have a metal vault, you're not going to be able to see the sunlight or the starlight or the light of the moon reflected and coming in.
Isn't that a contradiction?
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
How can you see the stars better than today if they're covered by a metallic sphere? Is metallic hydrogen clear now? It sure wasn't in 2016 when Ranga Diaz and Isaac Silveira created it in a lab at 495 gigapascals, which, you know, is almost 5 million times more pressure than the air pressure at the sea level on Earth.
He said, wait a minute, don't you know that most metals in their pure state are transparent?
No, Carl doesn't know that, because no one knows that, because it's not true. The only currently known metal that can be transparent is aluminum. If you want to claim that metallic hydrogen is transparent, even though it has never been observed to be so, you have to actually make some and then show that it's transparent. Good luck, because unlike the EM shielded egg experiment, this one is actually going to be nearly impossible to conduct without millions of dollars in funding.
I said, I wasn't aware of that. He said, don't you remember that when our astronauts walked on the surface of the moon, the visors of their helmets actually contained a thin coating of gold?
By thin, he means electroplated. That's about as thin as it is possible to get, and it was supposed to be used to block out actual sunlight like a solar filter. You couldn't just use these as glasses down on Earth, they'd be the most extreme sunglasses in the world. Further, if the gold were any thicker, it wouldn't be transparent. So sure, I guess if you get any metal as thin as physically possible, it won't block all visible light. But that's not the same thing as being transparent, nor does it mean that the firmament was transparent metallic hydrogen, unless we want to say it was like a single atom thick or something.
Pure gold, micro-thin, and it was transparent. They could look out on the surface of the moon and actually see all the details in vivid relief.
Kind of. The visor was able to be slid up when not facing the sun so the astronauts could see better, specifically because it was hard to see through the gold. That's also why when you see them with the visor down, you can't really see their faces, because the visor is actually not very transparent.
With the blast shield down, I can't even see.
I said, that's amazing. You can look through pure gold. He said, that's right. He said, that's not all. I know what metal was in this firmament.
Oh, are we finally going to get to the point? That'd be nice.
He later came to the museum and reiterated that at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories.
Jesus Christ, I'm cutting out until he gets to the part where he tells us it's metallic hydrogen. I can't send any more of this goddamn anecdote that, while stupid, I just don't give a shit about. Carl comes back in to say that you can compress water molecules of oxygen. No, you can't do that. Oxygen is atoms, and simply compressing water doesn't separate the covalent bonds between the atoms. He also said that they added energy. I don't know what he means by that. They didn't use water, they used liquid hydrogen and liquid helium. The paper is metallization of fluid molecular hydrogen at 140 gigapascals, 1.4 megabars, by S. Weir et al., published in Physical Review Letters, March 11th, 1996. Feel free to take a look.
The hydrogen, when compressed, with energy added under supercold cryogenic circumstances.
Cryogenic circumstances, huh? Weird, because the paper says that the temperature was 400 Kelvin, which is nearly 127 degrees Celsius or 260 degrees Fahrenheit. And they calculated that during the shocking process, the temperature might have been as high as 1,000 Kelvin or 727 Celsius, 1,340 Fahrenheit. I wonder what kinds of temperatures Carl thinks are hot, if that counts as cryogenic. It's almost like he didn't actually read the paper this story relies on, since he got both the starting materials and the conditions wrong. I bet back in 1996 it was actually hard to check this stuff if you were just in his audience. It must have been so easy to just lie to people.
The hydrogen bonded into a crystalline lattice, took upon itself a very unique form in crystalline lattice, was first transparent, later became opaque. Other laboratories followed up And what we've enlarged here is a very small section of an experiment. This is actually 1/1,000,000th of a cubic inch of space encompassed, and we've enlarged it here. You'll see the actual photograph here. The lab photo shows the dark areas as hydrogen taking on a metallic context.
Yeah, it started out as clear liquid hydrogen, which is normal for hydrogen. But as the temperatures and pressures reached their very high levels, it became an opaque metal. And I think the phrase Carl wants here is, entered a solid metallic phase, not taking on a metallic context, which is a phrase that means nothing, except that Carl is way out of his depth.
The lighter areas show hydrogen in crystalline form, metallic hydrogen, but transparent.
Nothing in any observation of metallic hydrogen that I can find indicates that it is transparent. It starts as a transparent non-metallic liquid, but then goes black, then becomes a shiny opaque metal. If Carl has a source that isn't just some book published by a creationist publishing house, but is instead an actual paper for this claim of fully transparent metallic hydrogen, I'll take a look. So far, he hasn't put one up on screen, though.
The transparent area, veins, are not superconductive, but the opaque area is actually superconductive.
Okay, a source. Neat. And of course, the paper directly contradicts Carl's claims. In fact, it says nothing about superconductivity, and reports that as pressure on the hydrogen increased, that light absorption did as well, and that at the transition to a metallic phase, the hydrogen was opaque, and its optical properties were dominated by Raman scattering, which is a kind of scattering in which the light scattered is altered in frequency by the substance off of which it scatters, which means that far from transmitting light, the hydrogen was reflecting light. I can't express how surprised I am that Carl might be lying about this paper. Also, I'd like to point out that the sample of hydrogen is microscopically thin, so it seems like, if anything, metallic hydrogen is even less transparent than gold, which is already pretty darn opaque.
Now, we're not talking about a wide band in this firmament. Probably, at most, just a few inches thick. That's all that's necessary.
Yeah, all that's necessary to shut out all visible light. Also, what's keeping this thing at the 200 or so gigapascals needed to keep the hydrogen metallic? And since this is metallic hydrogen, it definitely is not water. So I'm not sure why Carl got so hyped up about water. This whole idea isn't even internally consistent. This is just bad fantasy world building.
And superconductivity is a very special phenomenon.
That's true.
When the hydrogen became opaque, you could not see through it, but it became opaque simply in veins.
The original source does not say this.
The entire structure did not become opaque. That still leaves the channels for the light to stream directly through, because the vast bulk of the material is crystalline hydrogen in a transparent form, metallic but transparent.
No, that's just something Carl made up, but even if he didn't, remember, this layer is supposed to have been several inches thick. Even if there were transparent veins, that wouldn't be enough to let significant light through, especially since Carl has said that when this canopy existed, the stars could be seen even better than we see them now. Once again, on his own terms, this just doesn't make sense.
But the superconductive material, metallic hydrogen, does a very special job.
Well, it would if it existed, but no one has reliably demonstrated metallic hydrogen to be superconductive under any conditions. There have been hypotheses that it might be, and there was one report of an experiment indicating that it was superconductive, but the results of that experiment have never been replicated, nor has superconductivity ever again been indicated in experimental results. As a result, the only reasonable conclusion to reach at this time is that metallic hydrogen is generally not superconductive, but being a metal, it is highly conductive. That being said, there's a world of difference between a metal with a low resistivity and a superconductor with literally zero resistivity.
I have a photo here from NASA, and I'd like to show you this photo that has made the front page issue of one of NASA's briefs.
Apparently no one bothered to rehearse this or anything. Good to know that Carl knows as much about video production as he seems to about science.
Here is a superconductive material at fingertip. Here is a magnet. And remember, the Earth has a magnetic field. The Earth is one giant magnet.
Well, kind of? But okay, let's see what he's going on about. I'm guessing he's going to say that the firmament was held in place by quantum locking.
Here you have the magnet suspended above the superconductive material, or you can do it the other way with no difficulty. It'll hang at the bottom, or the superconductive material will suspend above the magnet. Now that's amazing.
It is, and that is indeed quantum locking.
That means that this thin layer of bonded metallic hydrogen,
which isn't superconducting,
superconductive in veins, tiny veins, transparent in the rest of the material, would actually hold the firmament in suspension above the earth. Now that answers so many, many problems.
Oh hey, I was right, and I've already explained why this doesn't work. It simply doesn't work because metallic hydrogen isn't superconductive in known contexts. And it's been checked at temperatures from several thousand Kelvin all the way down to like minus 200 Celsius. So, you know, it's not going to be superconducting in the firmament either.
There is a gentle glow that hydrogen bears when it is energized.
Is that just Carl's way of saying that hydrogen gets bright when it's hot? Because that's not a revelation. That's kind of what the sun is.
I brought today a very special instrument.
Oh, he actually remembered where he put it this time. That's nice.
I brought a supply of electrical energy, and I brought a little tube, a little flask with hydrogen. And we want to turn this the energy on to energize the hydrogen, and it glows a very special color.
Ah, I see. This isn't incandescence. He's going to ionize the hydrogen, making a plasma. Then he'll get the emission spectrum out of it. Okay, that is indeed a real thing. I do wonder what point he's trying to make, though.
As we turn the energy on, I want you to notice the special color that hydrogen glows. It's pink. Technically, it's 6365 angstrom magenta. That's pink. Notice the oxygen also is glowing blue, but in the center area, the compressed area, the hydrogen overpowers the blue of the oxygen, and thus you get a pink color.
What oxygen? That's clearly not water in there. Does Carl just not know the difference between diatomic hydrogen and water? I think he might not, which is profoundly stupid.
Now, you have seen that pink color at sunrise and often at sunset. Just before sunrise, you see a glow of pink. The basic reason you see that glow of pink is that the water molecules are charged by the consistent, lower level, intense rays of the sun's energy. When they're charged, the blue is seen from the oxygen radiation, but the magenta pink of the hydrogen overpowers the blue for just those few moments because you have intense energy field lines, and you see pink. At sunset, you see some of that color, but it's contaminated by dust particles in the atmosphere.
No, it's just Rayleigh scattering. For this to be what Carl says it is, the water in the atmosphere would have to break into dissociated atoms and ionize, then be excited to thousands of degrees, which is what happened in his little toy, skipping the water part since there's no water in it, just rarefied hydrogen gas. The reason Carl can use that toy safely is that there's so little hydrogen that even when it's at an absurdly high temperature, there's so little heat that it basically can't cause problems on any reasonable timescale. Instead, the reason for the sunset varying from pink to orange is because of the anisotropic scattering of blue and red light in the atmosphere. I promise, there isn't a rotating ring of supercharged hydrogen plasma centered around the Terminator line just hanging out in the atmosphere.
What I'm suggesting is that there was a gentle pinkish glow in that crystalline firmament.
Hey, here's a fun fact. Hydrogen can't be both a plasma and a metal at the same time. So no, this is completely insane. I keep thinking I've reached the limit of how stupid Carl's ideas can be, if you can even call something this incoherent an idea. But then, nope, he goes out and outdoes himself. We're definitely well over 1,000 millihovens right now.
I have a pair of pink glasses.
I don't care. He just goes on about the alleged benefits of pink glasses, and then for some reason thinks that this makes his nonsense ideas about superconducting, glowing, optically clear metallic hydrogen plasma more plausible. It's a complete non sequitur, and frankly, making this video is starting to make me go insane, so we're not going to talk about his weird sunglasses.
Research found that not only did that hydrogen in its transparent form,
so not metallic then, got it,
transmit all the spectra of light.
There's only one spectrum of light. Maybe Carl means it could transmit the whole spectrum. I don't know. He clearly has never had any clue what he's talking about.
So that you got all of the intense colors coming right through all the visible colors.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
But it filtered out the shortwave radiation, and it became fiber optic. That is, it transferred the energy of this light throughout the firmament. What this means is the sunlight of day shining on the day side of the earth in the firmament actually had its light transferred diminishingly to the night side, which means
there was never really night. Which seems to contradict the Bible's earlier claim that you could see the stars before the flood, because if you think light pollution is bad now, well, this would be an absolute astronomical nightmare. Has Carl ever held two thoughts in his head at once to check to see if they're compatible with each other? It seems like he hasn't.
When the scripture states that the greater light, the sun, rule the day, and the lesser light rule the night, that certainly involved the moon, but it involved more than the moon. It involved the transfer of energy from the day side through this fiber optic firmamental canopy to the night side as well.
Carl really, really likes adding to the scriptures, doesn't he?
That means that in all probability before the flood, there was no midnight darkness. That meant that dusk, which is one of our very finest times of the 24-hour cycle, actually had the ambient glow carried all night long. That meant that the stars would be seen in more vivid detail.
Carl is describing basically the worst conditions for viewing stars. You might know this just from being alive and looking at the sky, but the brighter the sky is, the fewer stars you can see. So once again, Carl is just contradicting himself. Am I currently debunking an actually brain-damaged person? I really have trouble thinking that he'd lie about something and make the lie this stupid. I'm starting to feel like he might actually have a real medical problem with his brain, and that perhaps I should leave him alone. Like, there's a reason I wouldn't cover the time cube guy. He was clearly mentally ill and deserved more compassion than ridicule. On the other hand, even if that is the explanation for this, he somehow has people who take his drivel seriously, and on this basis try to change things like school curricula to reflect this insanity. That's not true for the time cube guy, so maybe I should be making this anyway. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments. In the meantime though, since I can't see those comments while I'm making this video, I'll continue on.
Because the red filter was built in, so the full color of the stars could be seen.
How could the full color of red stars be seen if you're filtering out red light?
But that means you had no midnight darkness. At midnight, it probably was about like the ambient dusk of day in intensity of light. It's quite natural that an infant is afraid of the dark once they're able to see.
Yeah, the unknown is scary, and given it's completely unknown how Carl's mind works, because he's clearly an inhuman abomination, that's why I'm making this series in October. Because if Carl doesn't give you the uncanny valley heebie-jeebies, nothing will.
It's quite natural that men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. It's quite natural that light is beneficial. So the greater light rule the day and the lesser light rule the night. That lesser light, again, certainly was the moon, but it also, I believe, involved transfer of light fiber optically through that canopy.
I like how he hasn't actually made any argument for fiber optic transmission of light. He just kind of said it. It hasn't made sense yet, and it kind of destroyed a lot of his other ideas. Oh well.
Now, I said a moment ago this would solve a lot of major problems. It certainly would. Our research has indicated that once the creation week was complete, this bubble of water above, water beneath, in just a very thin film with hydrogen structurally interlaminated within that water, crystalline hydrogen, in thin veins that were opaque, but more normal veins that were transparent.
I love how he doesn't even notice that this hydrogen has to be under hundreds of gigapascals of pressure. Just don't worry about that.
Assimilating the light also assimilated the short wave energy. This solves a major problem.
The main winding was of the normal lotus-o-deltoid type placed in panendermic semi-boloid slots of the stator. Every seventh conductor being connected by a non-reversible Tremi pipe to the differential girdle spring on the up end of the gram meters.
Creationists have advisedly pointed out that if we were to go back with the intensity of the Earth's magnetic field decreasing exponentially every few hundred years, if we were to extrapolate back in time,
which, as I noted earlier, we can't do because we actually have a paleomagnetic record, which shows that the Earth's magnetic field isn't simply decaying.
Between 15 and 20,000 years ago, the intensity of that field would run off the chart. The Earth's magnetic field would have the intensity of a magnetic star.
That has the same energy as when creationists say that humans couldn't have been around for 100,000 years because their population would be in the quadrillions or whatever. The very fact that someone thinks that this is the outcome of their model is evidence that their model doesn't work. It's called argumentum ad absurdum, and when you come across one in your own reasoning, it means that you're the one who's made the boneheaded mistake.
And that is totally implausible. Life systems could not function. They could not function even 10,000 years ago. So we're talking about a very brief period of time in Earth history, like between 6,000 and 7,000 years ago.
I love that so far, Carl's best argument for a young Earth is that if you decide to just not understand magnetism, and you ignore the actual evidence, the Earth just can't be older than about 7,000 years old. And you know what? That's true. If you just ignore evidence and misunderstand fundamental aspects of science, you can indeed reach the conclusion of young Earth creationism.
Recently, I received a fax, handwritten.
Were faxes still a big thing in 1996? I don't remember.
And I've learned through the years to read the signature of a letter before reading the letter. I want to know who's speaking.
I needed a new heel for my shoe. So, I decided to go to Morganville, which is what they call Shelbyville in those days.
He just tells a long anecdote about getting a fax from some Soviet scientist who apparently used algebra to prove Genesis. It neither makes sense, makes claims, nor is it interesting. It also probably didn't happen. Of course, there's no name and there's no citation. I'm skipping past it and sparing you the irrelevant and probably fictional 3-minute anecdote.
This model that I'm proposing to you, Creation in Symphony, answers major problems.
Yeah, by creating infinitely more major problems.
Creation scholars such as Dr. Russell Humphreys, Dr. Thomas Barnes, other outstanding creation scholars have certainly been right in concluding that whether the decay is a free decay or dynamic decay, it all shows that the decay has been exponential.
By it, I presume he means the math that they made up to get the answers they wanted, but that is directly contradicted by all that pesky data.
And that decay of the Earth's magnetic field means that creation was just a short time in the past.
We've already covered the supposed magnetic field decay. I'm not doing it again.
That means that there was an interdiction at the time of the flood, disrupting that.
There's no known mechanism for any flood model that can combine with Humphrey's explanation of the origin and evolution of Earth's magnetic field that can allow for magnetic reversals at all. The fact that creationists are accepting magnetic reversals means that they cannot accept Humphrey's magical magnetic spheres of water.
A slight buildup around the time of Christ's visit to Earth, and that's quite astounding.
And also precluded by Humphrey's model, which can only allow for decay.
The magnetism in the rock showed it was a little stronger 2,000 years ago.
I guess I am covering this again. Oh well, but this yet again directly contradicts Humphrey's model, meaning that his model doesn't work and you can't base anything on it.
The problem is this. If the Earth's magnetic field began with an exponential decay, showing that it was created recently, that means that the Creator wrote into the formula a decay that in a very short period of time would disrupt the optimal expression of the life forms.
Cool. Well, since none of that happened, and we can tell, because even the evidence Carl used means that Humphrey's model is bunk, I guess it's not a problem to worry about. But on the bright side, apparently, if you believe in Jesus hard enough, the problems go away or something. I don't know, it doesn't make any sense. And I won't subject you to this repetitious word salad.
In the next session, we'll talk about the anthropic principle. Was the creation, was the universe designed for the benefit of man? Evidence in physics shows that it certainly was.
I don't know if I physically can sit through another one of these. Tell you what, get this video to 30,000 views or 5,000 likes and I'll do the next episode. Otherwise, I probably won't for my own sanity.
This also solves the problem of carbon-14.
Oh, I was unaware of any such problem.
Anytime a bone is found, anytime an artifact is found, the press very rapidly announces there was a carbon dating done on it, very little carbon was in it, therefore that means that it's extremely old.
Jeez, Carl can't even get the basics of carbon dating right. It's not measuring how much carbon is present, it's measuring the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14. This is the absolute most basic thing about carbon dating.
The basic ultraviolet radiation, which comes in to us today, is a problem for us. Cancer is generated on the surface of the skin by mutational damaging change, but it also does something else. We lost that bubble. We lost that firmament at the time of the flood.
That's not what the Bible says. Instead, it says that the floodwaters came in through the firmament, which remains intact at the end of the flood in Genesis 8:2, when God closes the floodgates in the firmament and stops the fountains of the great deep, allowing the water to recede. How could the floodgates of the firmament be closed if there were no more firmament? I thought Carl was supposed to believe the Bible, yet here he's contradicting it. So much for biblical inerrancy, I guess. The Bible is only inerrant when Carl wants it to be.
It collapsed, and the system to re-energize the Earth's magnetic field collapsed along with it.
Once again, that's a meaningless statement.
Subsequently, over a period of centuries, we lost the suspension of water molecules in the upper atmosphere to such a degree that ultraviolet radiation streams in at an alarming rate.
So it's ozone that blocks UV rays. Water does almost nothing to block UV rays. That's why even on a cloudy day you can get a sunburn, even though it will take a bit longer. But oddly enough, the canopy that Carl is proposing doesn't seem to have any ozone. Also interesting is that he's talking about UV rays when Kent normally talks about X-rays. It's not really apropos of anything, I just think it's an odd difference between these two who are usually on the same page about most things.
Not only does that ultraviolet radiation harm living systems by generating cancer, by generating free radicals, we ingest those free radicals, they bond to the cellular structure, even to the DNA. Radicalized oxygen is a major problem.
That's not exactly how free radicals work, and they're not radicalized oxygen, which isn't a thing. Although if it were, I like to think of it as like oxygen molecules with spiky hair, who listen to punk rock and connect all bad things that have ever happened anywhere at any time to late-stage capitalism. But who can't really define what that is, and who somehow think that the labor theory of value is something that makes sense.
It bonds to almost any chemical agent it comes in contact with. We ingest all of that, and we're damaging ourselves to a major degree. We don't have that firmamental canopy any longer. But it also did something else.
Yeah, apparently it blocked the view of stars, while being transparent, but also somehow fiber optic, and also glowing.
The loss of that canopy and the influx of ultraviolet radiation charges particles in the upper atmosphere. This charge of particles causes an actual neutron to be emitted.
No, UV radiation isn't nearly powerful enough to knock neutrons free. That's gamma rays, which come in as cosmic rays. Carl could look this up, but then he chooses to be wrong. I think that makes him willingly ignorant.
It's assimilated by nitrogen-14 in the upper atmosphere. In turn, nitrogen-14 expels an electron or photons.
No, the nitrogen absorbs the neutron and emits a proton. It's that carbon-14 that emits an electron, and it also emits an antineutrino as required for the conservation of mass and charge.
And in the process, it transmutes to carbon-14. Carbon-14 is not normal in the life chain.
The life chain, huh? I guess Carl feels free to just make up whatever terms he sees fit.
Carbon-12 and carbon-13 are normal in the life chain. Carbon-14 is radioactive. The principle is if you find after 5,600 years or so, carbon-14 having lost half its mass.
No, it will have about half decayed, losing almost no mass, since the difference in mass between nitrogen-14 and the carbon-14 that it becomes is almost zero.
If you find something with very little carbon-14, that means it's been around a long time. Not so. Since we know the firmament was there in the creation model, since we know it would have filtered out the ultraviolet radiation,
which isn't the source of neutrons that cause carbon-14.
That means the primary generation of carbon-14 would have not been functional at all. That means that if you find something with very little carbon-14, it simply means it was deposited approximately at the time of Noah's flood. It does not mean it was extremely old at all.
Even if we assume that the canopy blocked cosmic rays, the actual cause of carbon-14 production, what this should mean is that we should have a gap in reported carbon-14 dates. The technique should work after the flood on, so dates from about 4,000 years ago and sooner should work. But that's it. We shouldn't be able to find things returning dates in the range of 20 or 30,000 years, because everything much older than 4,000 years should simply not have carbon-14 at all. So this model makes a prediction, and the prediction fails spectacularly. This means that the model doesn't work and should be discarded or at least modified.
The creation model answers so many problems.
Incorrectly, and it creates so many more.
And in the next session, we'll get closer to home.
Much more is waiting to be explored. Don't miss our next journey into the music of the spheres.
It's over. I'm finally free from this living hell. Like I said earlier, I'm not doing another one of these anytime soon unless this series does exceptionally well. Maybe I'll do it again for October for early access. Maybe in a year I'll have recovered enough to forget just how horrific all of this was, which I guess makes it appropriate for a spooky themed series. If you enjoyed the video, hit like and tell me in the comments. If you didn't, feel free to hit dislike and tell me what the problem was in the comments. Either way, please remember to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you're always notified when I have more content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovend, Whispers, Denny5252, Elron Teller, Phil Brevara, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostick Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Monkey They Them, Sphincter of Doom, Strawberry Vein, Star Runner, and Dr. Tapioca Weasel. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.